Chapter 2838. Although they were unable to leave their peaks, they could still control the power of the peaks to resist. No one would have thought that Princess Mingzhu would attack from the peak where the white sword had cut off and not attack from nearby. This was thought-provoking, but they did not have much time to think about the reason. How to protect the two peaks from being destroyed was the most important thing. At the same time, even Ming Yan attacked. This mountain and the 9 peaks could be said to exist as one. If one of them was destroyed, then their 9 peaks origin returning array would most likely have a loophole. It might even be broken because of this. That was extremely likely. If they could stop it, they would naturally not hesitate. However, Xiaoyang stood up as if he was possessed. The green dragon in his hand flew out and directly shattered Ming Yan's attack. Ming Yan glared at Xiaoyang fiercely. This guy was clearly seriously injured and did not even have much combat strength left. But now he was like a ghost blocking in front of him, unable to interfere with other things. This caused Ming Yan's heart to be filled with anger. This little fellow had gone too far. No matter what, it did not seem to be going so smoothly. Ming Yan clenched his fists, his nails almost digging into his flesh. He gritted his teeth, wishing he could swallow Xiaoyang alive. These 3 people could be said to be each more difficult to deal with than the other. Just now, they seemed to be fighting separately, but when necessary, their cooperation was extremely close. Boom! Boom! Princess Mingzhu's attack was so overbearing. The golden sword aura directly exploded the opponent's power of providence, and at the same time, it also affected the peaks. Immediately, the 2 peaks that belonged to Huangwu and Changjiao, although they were not directly destroyed, they were forced to retreat by 10 feet. At a glance, one could even see the extremely flat cut. Princess Mingzhu glanced at it, then looked at the white sword. Her eyes were filled with anticipation. The white sword was also worthy of being called the sharpest sword. This sword cut so smoothly, it could be said to have brought out the sharpness to the extreme. It was a pity that, although the sharpness was enough, the strength was still lacking. If the strength was enough, Princess Mingzhu would not need to use this sword again. The peak moved back by 30 feet. Immediately, the entire array began to show a moment of stagnation due to the problem with the foundation of the array, and some gaps also began to appear. Some power of heaven and earth that did not belong to this small world seeped into it. After sensing this change, Xiaoyang revealed a satisfied smile. The result was rather satisfactory. Sure enough, this 1 mountain and 9 peaks were the foundation of the formation. There were some things that were difficult to conceal in a natural formation. Once the right medicine was used, many things would become much simpler. Thinking of this, Xiaoyang also took a deep breath, and his entire person seemed to have become much more relaxed. Perhaps many things were not as difficult as one imagined. At least for now, there was still a great chance. As long as one was willing to try, everything was possible. But soon, Xiaoyang discovered that although the array formation fluctuated for a moment, it quickly stabilized and did not collapse. Xiaoyang quickly began to figure it out in his heart. He glanced at the mountain peak that had already shifted, and he quickly had some thoughts and estimates in his heart. What a powerful array formation! Even if the 2 peaks are destroyed, the remaining 1 mountain and 7 peaks are still a whole. Xiaoyang said, and the corners of his mouth twitched. It could be said that there was no direct connection between the 9 peaks, and they were all channeled into the main mountain. As long as the main mountain was not destroyed, this array formation would not be destroyed. This was a natural array formation, and it had a natural advantage. If 1 peak was destroyed, it would be a small matter. It would just be that the power and luck of the peak would be weaker. Ah, so this is what you have been planning all along. You did not expect that the result would disappoint you. Ming Yan sneered and said. As soon as he finished speaking, Ming Yan's voice became much colder. Xiaoyang shrugged helplessly. He did not think of this point, and it could be said that it was a very big mistake. But since things had already come to this, there was no other way. He could only take one step at a time. Fortunately, although the array formation was not destroyed, some power of heaven and earth from the outside world had already begun to seep in. Although those luck would be assimilated very quickly after entering the array formation, it did not matter either. There were still some chances. It indeed deviated from my expectations. It can be seen from this that you all don't have much understanding of array formations. At the end of the day, it's just considered being blessed by heaven, Xiaoyang said with a cold laugh. But being blessed by heaven had its own benefits. This array formation was formed naturally. It also led to wanting to truly break the array that could only destroy the one mountain and 9 peaks. Destroying the main mountain probably could not completely break the array either. These 9 peaks seemed to have no connection. Most likely, once the main mountain was gone, the 9 peaks would also form a new array formation. If the 9 peaks were destroyed, then the main mountain would become an independent array formation. This was the advantage of being blessed by heaven. Although the in-flame world had many barren mountains and unruly rivers, these spiritual lands were different. Heaven had always been fair. In the allocation of some resources, it was very hard to jump out of a number. The few great spiritual lands dividing up the shares, then other places would naturally have variables. It could also be said that a place's environment nurtured a place's people. It was also because of these few great spiritual lands that the in-flame world's few great factions were created. Suddenly, 2 miserable screams came over. Lifting their eyes to look, it was Princess Mingzhu handing over another 2 items. Kanglin suffered a sword and fled back to his own mountain peak under heavy injuries, borrowing the power of the array formation to nourish his injuries. But Qiudi's strength was a little weaker, and his luck was also more unlucky. Under this sword, he lost half his life. When Princess Mingzhu was at rank 5, she could still divert attention to fight with them. Reaching rank 6, wouldn't killing them be as easy as capturing them? After this unforeseen event appeared, Ming Yan gave a muffled groan. Immediately, his aura also started soaring. If Princess Mingzhu was allowed to do as she pleased, most likely, she would slaughter all of the 9 peak masters. That was just a matter of time. Although Kanglin and Qiudi did not die and hid in their own mountain peaks, it did not mean that they could be safe and sound. In an instant, Ming Yan's body was covered in a layer of pale blue flames. Although it was very small, the aura released made people feel as if they fell into an ice cave. Within the pale blue flames, there were also traces of purple. It was colorful and made people feel extremely strange. Ming Yan's aura was also rapidly rising. The luck and power of the 1 mountain and 9 peaks were continuously flowing into his body. In God art. Xiaoyang suddenly felt uneasy. Chapter 2839. The expressions of Zhou and the others changed drastically when they sensed this change. It was as if they had seen something extraordinary. Hou Ji was shocked, but more than that, he was excited. It was as if he had never seen such a grand occasion before, and he was overjoyed. The current situation was indeed beyond their expectations and control, but it made them feel very comfortable, because it was time for this battle to come to an end. The Yin God art. I didn't expect the Old Alliance master to bring out this move. Hou Ji stuttered a little, and it was obvious that his emotions were not very stable. The main thing was that this situation had happened too suddenly, and it even caught them off guard. Everything had happened too quickly, and it could be said that it was unexpected. Looks like the Old Alliance master has also comprehended the 3rd level of this technique, the Yin God body. And Zhou said in a low voice, the Yin God art was divided into several levels. In fact, the 10 people of the 1 mountain and 9 peaks had comprehended it, but everyone was only at the 1st level. In order to comprehend the Yin God art, the conditions required were extremely harsh. If one had not reached the 5th level martial emperor realm, no one would be able to learn it. This was the conclusion obtained from countless experiments since ancient times. Of course, it was not that there were no accidents, but in these tens of thousands of years, only one freak had appeared. Moreover, that person naturally could not be judged with common sense. In this case, killing Xiaoyang and the other two would be a piece of cake. Ho Ji said, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became wider. It was as if the victory of this battle was already in sight, and everyone was looking forward to it. And Zhou kept silent. Even if the old alliance master had used his final trump card, it would still be difficult to obtain the final victory, no matter how one looked at it. As the Mo family's greatest reliance, the New River had even blocked an almighty from the myriad beast realm back then. However, in the end, it was still broken by the three of them, and the entire family was destroyed. Therefore, no one knew what other tricks Xiaoyang and the others had up their sleeves. If they were careless, they would probably pay a heavy price. Looking at Zhou's troubled expression, the great fortune peak master could not help but feel a little surprised, because the demeanor he displayed at this time was completely different from the current situation. Ho Ji didn't ask any more questions. He only felt that Zhou was trying his best to maintain the operation of the array, so he didn't ask any more questions. This was the most critical moment of the war, and they could not afford to make the slightest mistake. Therefore, no matter where they were, they had to be careful and not let their opponents find an opportunity. In particular, the mountains controlled by Huang Wu and Changjiao had been pushed back 10 meters. Their great formation had already lost some of its power. If they could push it back, they might have a chance to recover. With this thought in mind, Ho Ji immediately asked, "Can we work together to push the two peaks back?" And Zhou nodded in agreement. He felt that this was indeed feasible. Even though the two mountain peaks had been severed, and it was impossible to completely restore them, Chu Feng was still able to do so. However, even if he couldn't recover to his peak, he would still be much stronger than he was now. When the peak masters heard this, they immediately began to mobilize the heaven and earth providence, wanting to give it a try. It was hard to say what the result would be, but they would only know after they tried. After Princess Mingzhu forced Kanglin and Qiu Di to retreat, she didn't chase after them. Instead, she went to Xiaoyang's side, as Ming Yan displayed an even more terrifying power. If Xiaoyang were to bear it alone, it would be difficult for him to fight against Ming Yan. If he wasn't careful, he might even lose his life. In other words, if any one of the three of them died, it would be almost impossible to break the formation or even exterminate the converging fire alliance. "Are you all right?" Princess Mingzhu asked softly. Xiaoyang shook his head slightly. He held the divine sword that looked like a green dragon and looked determined. However, one could also see that his eyebrows were constantly twitching due to pain. At the same time, Xiaoyang also sensed that his opponent's aura was rapidly rising. There might be a huge change in the situation, so he could only grit his teeth and persevere without being careless. The stronger Ming Yan became, the worse it would be for them. "Leave this person to me. You go and break the formation." Princess Mingzhu took a deep breath and told him what she had been pondering. Now that Xiaoyang's situation was not optimistic and Princess Mingzhu had broken through, she felt that she could still fight against Ming Yan with her cultivation of rank 6. Ming Yan was the strongest person, and only by killing him could they completely pacify the converging fire alliance. However, if the formation was not broken, it would be extremely difficult to kill Ming Yan. As long as Ming Yan was not supported by the formation, he would only be an ordinary rank 7. With Princess Mingzhu's ability, it was not impossible to fight him. Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly. If things were really that simple, it would be great. Moreover, with his current situation, there was no shortcut to break the formation. He could only destroy the mountains one by one. However, would it be easy for him to do so? At that moment, Ming Yan's body was completely enveloped by the flames. The power that he emitted was even more terrifying and shocking. It was as if they would not have a good ending if the stalemate continued. "Who do you think I am?" "Ha! Who thinks that I can come and go as I please? Ming Yen sneered, and there was a fierce look between his brows. Right now, the might that Ming Yen had displayed was many times stronger than before. When Xiaoyang heard that, he was even more shocked. Ming Yan's aura had increased by a level. Now, it would be difficult for Princess Mingzhu to stop this old man alone. Originally, he thought that as long as Princess Mingzhu succeeded in breaking through, victory would be at hand. However, he did not expect that the old man's strength was already so terrifying. Today, even if I have to drop in rank, I want all of you to die here. Ming Yan roared, and his aura became even stronger. At that moment, Ming Yan was like a demon god, unstoppable. After this unforeseen event occurred, Xiaoyang's heart could not help but be greatly shocked. At the same time, he could not help but think more about Ming Yan's ability. To be able to say such ruthless words, it showed that Ming Yan was prepared for the worst. It could even be said that even if the old alliance master was willing to pay any price, he would still want Xiaoyang and the other two to die here, unable to leave alive. Chapter 2840. The reason why Ming Yan was acting so crazily was because he knew all too well that if he continued to drag things out, there would be no benefits. Therefore, there was only one path he could choose, which was to do his best and kill them first. If he didn't get rid of Xiaoyang and gave them a chance to live, then he would be being cruel to himself. So what if his cultivation level dropped? The 7th level, to Ming Yan before, was an extravagant hope. The accidental breakthrough this time, plus the arrival of Xiaoyang and the others, made him even more certain that his cultivation level was a result of fate. As long as he could get rid of his opponents, what harm was there in experiencing the 7th level? Sometimes, if you can pick it up, you can let it go. If he was hesitant because of a moment's hesitation, then he would leave behind troubles in the future. That would be terrible. Plus, if he could end the battle quickly, then he wouldn't necessarily drop in cultivation level. Hearing this, Hoji couldn't help but shudder. If the old leader's cultivation level dropped, then the troubles he left behind would not be small. But Xiaoyang and the others were right in front of him. How could he underestimate them? If he allowed them to breathe or escape, then he would be letting the tiger return to the mountain. That would be the real trouble. By then, the Gathering Fire Alliance would still be facing destruction. Sometimes it was necessary to pay a price. Nobody could avoid this. But as long as he could achieve his goal, then what was the price he had to pay? If he kept fighting fearfully and without knowing why, then he would be going around in circles. Cutting the Gordian knot was a good thing. And Zhou's expression also became increasingly ugly. This was because he knew very well that the more things that the old alliance master displayed, the only explanation was just how difficult it was to deal with his opponent. Then again, the opponent broke the array of the Furious Roar and destroyed the Mo clan. This battle record was enough to explain many problems. It was just that they didn't want to accept it, so they didn't think too much about it. It was as if what the old leader did was the safest thing to do. So what if his cultivation level dropped? As long as the Gathering Fire Alliance was safe and sound, that was enough. Why should he worry about other things? If he lost his life, then he would lose everything. Being able to live and do things was the best outcome. With this thought in mind, and Zhou didn't dare to make any more detailed calculations. In the face of the general situation, the so-called scheme was still somewhat pale and powerless. You're just a paper puppet at the 7th rank. Even if you use some secret art to strengthen yourself, your foundation is too weak. Xiaoyang snorted. However, there was one point that Xiaoyang was quite clear in his heart. Ming Yan was only a weak rank 7 previously. However, as he displayed this secret technique, he became a strong rank 7. The change in strength was enough to be the last straw that crushed them. Princess Mingzhu held her golden sword. Seeing that Xiaoyang had no intention of backing down, she did not say anything else. Instead, she carefully observed her opponent. It could be said that if the two of them joined forces and were able to finish off Ming Yan, then the remaining 9 peak masters would be far from enough. Since he couldn't use the most gentle method to obtain victory, he could only take a gamble. What a boastful tone. You do have the ability to support your words. However, a gap is still a gap. No matter how much you know, no matter how much of a freak you are, you can't change the way of heaven. Ming Yan snorted coldly and said. Xiao Yang smiled but did not say anything. He had heard many such sayings before. Moreover, at the martial emperor realm, the difference of 1 rank could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth. However, it had not reached the point where they would shrink back at the sight of it. You are indeed very strong. However, Xiao Yang is right. In our eyes, your foundation is no different from a paper puppet. Princess Mingzhu sneered. It was also because of this that they were able to stand here with such heroic spirit. If their foundation was completely the same, then the difference in their ranks would be enough to crush them directly. Ming Yan snorted coldly. He did not want to be entangled with these juniors any longer. With a roar, his body flashed and he immediately launched an attack. Instantly, Xiao Yang saw a ball of extremely condensed Yin flame charging towards him. After activating the Yin god body, Ming Yan's aura and fighting style had undergone an earth-shaking change. Ming Yan's every move would definitely affect the direction of the heaven and earth's fate. It could be said that Ming Yan was the god of this mountain and 9 peaks. To be able to fight here, even if he had the upper hand, he would still have a majestic and unmoving appearance. Seeing Ming Yan charging towards him, Xiao Yang did not dare to hesitate. The green dragon in his hand shook. Instantly, countless green lightning burst out and bombarded towards the ball of flame. Green lightning sword essence was extraordinary and its strength was tyrannical. However, when the green lightning sword chi hit the faint layer of flame, it exploded with a loud bang as if it had no effect at all. At that moment, Ming Yan looked even more invincible. Xiao Yang couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This guy was indeed extraordinary. When this trump card was revealed, it showed that he was about to be crushed. Xiao Yang wanted to escape, but it seemed that it was already too late. With the support of the Yin god body, Ming Yan's speed now could be said to have reached a higher level, just like a ghost. But there was also a difference. His figure was as fast as a ghost, but the power emitted was unusually domineering. Golden light, 10,000 slaughter. Princess Mingzhu gave a low cry, and the golden sword in her hand immediately descended directly. In an instant, a ray of golden sword essence fell straight down, and the target seemed to be Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang also sensed it and immediately retreated to the back. Princess Mingzhu naturally could not take action against him, and the purpose of this sword was to wait for him to come. If Ming Yan wanted to forcefully find trouble with Xiao Yang, then when he charged here, that ray of golden sword chi would arrive. At that time, the golden sword chi would also directly tear Ming Yan's body apart. However, Ming Yan seemed to be oblivious. He was still charging forward, and no matter how horrifying your sword chi was, he seemed to turn a blind eye to it. Xiao Yang only cared about retreating. Whether he could come out unscathed or not, it could only depend on how powerful Princess Mingzhu's sword was. Ming Yan naturally also sensed that sword, but he did not put it in his eyes. After arriving, he directly punched Xiao Yang, who could not dodge in time and fell down again. In the next moment, Ming Yan did not dodge. Instead, he used his other hand to attack upwards. Rumble! That incomparably huge ray of golden sword chi was directly shattered by this punch. Chapter 2841. The golden sword chi exploded and Ming Yan was instantly shaken to the point that he sank down a little. He glanced at it with some reluctance before his gaze continued to land on Xiao Yang. If it was an ordinary rank 7 expert who took this blow, he would have been severely injured. However, even though there were some injuries on Ming Yan's body, they were only light injuries. He did not put it in his eyes. However, Ming Yan was equally shocked in his heart. This woman had only slashed out a sword in a hurry, but the power behind it was actually so terrifying. It was truly out of everyone's expectations. At least, Ming Yan felt that when he was at rank 6, he would not be able to slash out such a blow. But then again, even though Princess Mingzhu seemed to have broken through in a hurry, her foundation would not be used up so quickly. Hence, she still could not be measured as an ordinary rank 6 expert. However, Ming Yan's gaze still fell on Xiaoyang, as if he was not prepared to deal with the strongest Princess Mingzhu first. Ming Yan was also an old fox. He was very clear that if he were to kill Princess Mingzhu now, he would definitely spend more time and effort to give Xiaoyang a chance to breathe. However, Xiaoyang was severely injured now, and his condition was even worse. It was the time to kill them all. These 3 young people were not simple. Hence, he had to kill one of them first. Xiaoyang stood up shakily. Looking at Ming Yan, who was still unwilling to give up, he was instantly shocked. This old thing was really stubborn. However, his way of doing things was also correct. Whoever had a greater chance to break through, they only needed to bite on. Princess Mingzhu held the golden sword, but her brows were tightly knitted together. Originally, she wanted to be the main attacker and resist Ming Yan's attack, and let Xiaoyang find an opportunity. However, she did not expect that Ming Yan would not let go of Xiaoyang, and he did not seem to have much interest in her. Princess Mingzhu did not dare to think too much, although she could play a greater role in changing the situation from behind. However, she could not let it go like that now. If anything were to happen to Xiaoyang, then the other party's fear would completely vanish into thin air. At that time, the situation would become much more pessimistic. Princess Mingzhu already had an idea of what to do. She immediately charged towards Ming Yan. Since you're not willing to take the initiative to find me, then I'll take the initiative to find you and stop you so that you can't go past me to deal with Xiaoyang. When Ming Yan saw Princess Mingzhu charging at him with a sword in hand, he only snorted coldly and prepared to turn around and chase after Xiaoyang. However, when he saw the countless golden sword beams sealing off his path of escape, his thoughts changed slightly. Ming Yan was extremely domineering. He threw out a punch, as though he wanted to use his fist to forcefully open a path through the golden sword chi. And Zhou, Hoji, and the others trembled with fear as they watched. They never imagined that after this woman reached the Tier 6 realm, the strength she displayed would be so terrifying. If he were to attack them, who would be able to stop him? Even the old leader of the 7th rank had suffered a lot because of this. If it were them, they would probably end up like Kanglin, heavily injured by a single sword strike. If they couldn't dodge in time and were hit by a few more sword strikes, then the final outcome would only be death. In the past 100,000 years, only one monster has appeared in our Yin Flame world. I didn't expect the 4-realm alliance to have 3 of them. Hoji said with a displeased tone. The heavenly Tao had always been unfair. They felt that this was too unfair. However, they didn't know that the 4-realm alliance wasn't just one world. It was formed by 4 small worlds. No matter which small world it was, weren't they the most outstanding existences on their side? And Zhou only smiled and shook his head. Now he also understood one thing. That was, these people were able to ascend from small worlds. This was an extremely great feat. To ascend from a small world to a medium world was an extremely difficult matter. Moreover, they ascended with a world. Naturally, it went without saying how terrifying this ability was. It's very normal. And Zhou said self-deprecatingly. When he said this, even Zhou himself didn't believe it. However, this was the truth. They had no choice but to believe it. This was within reason. Princess Mingzhu's attack was very fierce. She didn't hesitate to take 2 punches and forcibly stopped Ming Yan. After stopping Ming Yan, Xiaoyang finally had a chance to catch his breath. Now, the situation on the 9 peaks of the one mountain had become extremely intense. Kanglin and Qiu Di had stabilized their injuries in their own peaks and walked out again. Their eyes quickly scanned the ground below and were ready to enter the battlefield again. "Can you still hold on?" Qiu Di asked with a wry smile. Kanglin shook his head and said, "Although the situation isn't good, we can continue." In the mountain, their injuries had completely healed. At the same time, the energy they had lost was completely replenished. They could continue to fight. It could be said that this was the terrifying part of the formation. As long as they didn't die, they could recover in the shortest time after returning to their own peaks and continue to enter the battlefield. Even if they couldn't decide the outcome of the battle, they could still use this convenience to slowly torture their opponents to death. In the next moment, Kanglin and Qiu Di looked at each other and directly charged toward Xiaoyang. Since they couldn't do anything to Princess Mingzhu, was it still a problem for them to join forces to deal with Xiaoyang, who was already seriously injured? They had the advantage of numbers and had the advantage of time and place. Therefore, no matter what they did, it was appropriate. The more they did, the more headache they would have on Xiaoyang and the other two. How would Princess Mingzhu dare to be distracted in the battle with Ming Yan? She could only continuously wave the golden sword in her hand and use the overbearing sword aura to force her opponent. As for how Xiaoyang would react next, it would depend on him. Even though Princess Mingzhu was young and vigorous, it could be seen that she was barely holding on. In the blink of an eye, Xiaoyang sensed Kanglin and Qiu Di charging towards him. He shouted, and the green dragon in his hand shook. Immediately, countless green lightning sword auras appeared like carps crossing the river, densely packed. Kanglin and Qiu Di were even more shocked when they saw the densely packed green lightning sword auras coming towards them. This fellow was clearly seriously injured. Yet, at this critical juncture, he was still able to attack. Moreover, he had even slashed out such a domineering sword chi. Wasn't this a little unreasonable? Xiaoyang was only weak in front of Ming Yan. In front of these two cultivators of the same realm, he was still an insurmountable mountain. He was only seriously injured and not exhausted. Chapter 2842. Kanglin and Qiu Di did not dare to be careless when they saw the endless green lightning sword chi attacking them. They retreated and used their divine abilities to deal with it. Xiaoyang was able to fight against the old alliance master, who was at the 7th level, so they were well aware of his strength. If they were to fight him head-on, they would only be asking for trouble and might even be severely injured. It was not worth it. Even if the peak could use its great luck and power to help them recover quickly, it would still be a waste of time. As a result, the situation was different. Xiaoyang took a deep breath, and his face was full of viciousness. If Kanglin and Qiu Di could not force him to retreat, he could not intervene in the other battle. Of course, in the current situation, if he did not get rid of Kanglin and Qiu Di, he really could not intervene. Even if he could get rid of them quickly, there would be a lot of trouble, and it would be difficult to fight against them head-on. The difference in cultivation level and the fact that he couldn't gain any advantage in other aspects made this battle extremely difficult. Wanting to win was like a fool's dream. It wasn't very likely. Princess Mingzhu did not care about what was going on behind her. She only focused on attacking like a madman and kept attacking Ming Yan. After a series of crazy bombardments, they finally managed to stabilize it, preventing it from continuing to cause trouble for Xiaoyang. The battle seemed to be divided again, and there was a big change. However, it was only the exchange of positions between Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu. Xiaoyang held the azure dragon in his hand and frowned subconsciously. An even more expansive idea began to spread rapidly in his mind. There were too many unexpected situations in this battle, so he could not continue to be in a stalemate. Moreover, the decision he made would affect the direction of the battle. In the next moment, the mountain river map appeared in his hand. He still had to try to see if he could succeed. Fortunately, the white sword had cut off 2 peaks, and Princess Mingzhu had used her great ability to blow them away, allowing a wisp of heaven and earth luck to enter them. He could also borrow some of it. He soon realized that it would be very difficult to invite the Emperor God over. Perhaps even if the God Emperor entered the stately painting, he would not be able to leave. It was also possible that if he tried to force his way out, he would be crushed to death by the power of heaven and earth. The spatial teleportation technique was incomparably mysterious to begin with, and the dangers that existed within it were incomparably numerous. If the situation was not good and he used it forcefully, it might only make the situation worse and even get out of hand. At this moment, Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. He had seen quite a lot of things. If he wanted the Celestial Emperor to come over, he would probably have to destroy another mountain. However, doing so would be extremely difficult. There was a huge difference between completely destroying a mountain and breaking it with a single sword strike. Moreover, Bai Jian's previous success was due to luck. Next, the mighty figures of the Gathering Fire Alliance would definitely pay extra attention and not give him a chance. Xiaoyang naturally had to carefully consider these things in his heart, and he couldn't allow any problems to arise. Every step had to be taken very steadily. There could not be any problems. In the blink of an eye, Songlan had already destroyed all the green lightning sword aura. Although there were some injuries on their bodies, they weren't very serious. You are already powerless. Why are you still holding on so bitterly? The earlier you die, the earlier you can reincarnate, Qiu Di said with a smile. Xiaoyang didn't reply and only stood with his sword in hand. He couldn't think too much at that moment. He could only let out a low roar, and the stately painting in his hand flew up and spread out. That ordinary-looking picture scroll was shining with a faint, profound light, and it looked very gentle. However, Songlan and Qiu Di's expressions changed. They had never seen such a technique and didn't know what it was. However, one thing was very clear. Xiaoyang wouldn't do anything meaningless. Moreover, he had taken it out at this point in time. It must be Xiaoyang's last resort. Thinking of this, the two of them didn't dare to hesitate and immediately rushed over. No matter what strange things you have, we'll take you down first. And Zhou, Hoji, and the other peak masters didn't hesitate at all. At the same time, they mobilized the power of the formation and began to put pressure on the painting. Under the suppression of many sides, even if you had any tricks up your sleeve, you had to kill it in the womb. Flowing Cloud Realm. The God Emperor sat in a courtyard in North Light City. After listening to King Qin's report, he nodded with great satisfaction. Suddenly, he saw the color of the sky change. A huge whirlpool suddenly appeared. The powerful suction force caused the God Emperor to frown. He had heard of such a scene before. Back then, when Xiaoyang and the other two returned, there was also such a strange scene. Could it be that Xiaoyang and the others had succeeded? Was that why such a phenomenon appeared and they returned so quickly? However, thinking about it, the news he just received was that they had just started fighting with the Fire Gathering Union. Because of this, the God Emperor's heart sank. He felt that this phenomenon didn't bring good news. It was very likely to be bad news. The God Emperor sucked in a cold breath. At the same time, he prepared to see what was going on. In a situation where the situation was unclear, it was best not to act rashly. Standing in front, King Qin also frowned slightly. He had taken care of many Yin Flame Realm cultivators over the past few days. He had only returned after confirming that they had all been eliminated. He hadn't even finished reporting the results of the battle yet. But there was a new situation. Suddenly, they saw a flame shoot up into the sky and surge into the whirlpool. The God Emperor frowned. He had seen the situation clearly and knew that the situation there was probably very bad. The God Emperor still hadn't received any news. He hadn't even received a request for help. However, the entrance to the secret realm was already open. This was enough to explain a lot of problems. Could it be that Xiaoyang's situation is very dangerous? King Qin asked anxiously. The God Emperor nodded gravely. He knew very well that unless it was absolutely necessary, Xiaoyang wouldn't have asked for help so easily. Moreover, he was very careful everywhere. He wouldn't have caused such a huge phenomenon Although it's clear that all external enemies have been eliminated, we can't be careless. Fourth brother, be more careful. Don't make any mistakes. If there are any changes, immediately ask your sister-in-law to come over. Don't let the flowing cloud realm suffer too great a loss. Otherwise, I won't have the face to see Xiaoyang again. The God Emperor smiled bitterly. Xiaoyang had risked his life for the safety of the Four-Realm Alliance. He had already done too much. His realm should be safe and sound. Chapter 2843. The Qin Emperor shook his head and sighed helplessly as he watched the God Emperor rush into the whirlpool in the sky. The battle at the Furious River was extremely dangerous, but Xiaoyang and the others didn't ask for help. They relied on their own abilities to break through the enemy's formation and kill the enemy. How domineering was that? However, the current situation was truly unexpected. Since Xiaoyang had taken the initiative to ask for help, one could imagine how bad their current situation was for them to act like this. Qin Emperor, the God Emperor, must have gone well this time. Sun Yukai glanced over and said with some trepidation. The Qin Emperor remained silent. He couldn't tell what the current situation was. However, the Qin Emperor was certain of one thing. As long as his big brother could arrive in time, this crisis could be resolved in the shortest amount of time. It could even turn the situation around. He was afraid that Xiaoyang would be too stubborn and ask for help at the last moment. If that was the case, the situation would be too terrible. Now that the God Emperor isn't here, tell the spies in the flowing cloud world to spread out another 3,000 miles. Report to me immediately if there's any movement. The Qin Emperor frowned and said. Hearing this, Sun Yukai immediately left to carry out the order. Since the Qin Emperor wanted to ensure the safety of the flowing cloud world, he could only continue to expand the defensive line. If he discovered the enemy's traces earlier, he could still come up with some countermeasures. If he didn't do anything and waited until the enemy attacked his home before he asked for help, he would suffer great losses, even if he could make it in time. Xiaoyang, oh Xiaoyang, you should have invited my big brother over earlier. Even Sword Master Li could have done it. The Qin Emperor sighed helplessly. In the Qin Emperor's opinion, if the God Emperor and Li Fengmu went over earlier, with the 5 of them working together, the Gathering Fire Alliance wouldn't be a threat at all. They would be able to deal with them quickly. If there were no experts guarding the territory and it was invaded, so what? Sometimes, some sacrifices couldn't be helped. No matter how many warriors died, it wouldn't be as important as the 3 of them. If anything happened to Xiaoyang, although the God realm would take care of the flowing cloud world, it couldn't be compared to him leading the way himself. Thinking of this, the smile on Qin Wang's face became extremely helpless. Now that it was a foregone conclusion, there was not much use in talking about it. Therefore, the only thing he could do now was to wait patiently for the news to come back. If an external enemy were to invade, timely dispatch and resist would minimize the losses. As for the other matters, they were truly in a difficult position, and there was nothing they could do about it. Actually, the Qin king had thought about going with the God Emperor, but when he thought about how his cultivation level wasn't high enough and how the flowing cloud realm really did need someone to guard it, he could only give up on that idea. Mu Yang was also stationed in Borealis City. He had heard many reports of success, but when he saw the vortex in the sky, his heart sank. It could be said that this was the worst news. It was not a triumphant return. Instead, it was a request for reinforcements. From this, it could be seen how terrible their current situation was. Mu Yang could only shake his head and sigh. There was nothing more he could do. All he could do was protect this land. If his strength was not high enough, he would not even have the qualifications to participate in that battle. After the God Emperor entered the vortex, the strange phenomenon disappeared in the shortest amount of time possible. The God Emperor came to a swamp that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was filled with hidden killing intent. The flame also shot through the air at an extremely fast speed, but the God Emperor stood rooted to the ground. This was because the flame had been transported by the array, but the array that belonged to the God Emperor did not appear. This point caused him to subconsciously scratch his head and laugh bitterly in a somewhat helpless manner. From the looks of it, he was truly helpless. Could it be that Xiaoyang did not plan for his existence at all? Or did he think that he would not send reinforcements? The God Emperor did not know the exact situation. He only had some guesses in his heart. The northern peak grotto heaven and the distant southern grotto heaven appeared in the flowing cloud realm later on. I'm afraid that this is also a secret realm, or rather, this is still the territory of the flowing cloud realm. I just don't know what kind of bridge was used to construct the teleportation array. The God Emperor's smile widened as he looked at it. At this moment, the God Emperor recalled that when Xiaoyang was participating in the grand competition of the God Realm, he had probed his 10 directions 8 wasteland map. This kid's comprehension of these things is extraordinary. The God Emperor laughed bitterly and did not think too much about it. He just had to wait and see when Xiaoyang would remember him. Bai Jian relied on the advantage of the 3,000 flying swords and displayed his valiance. He directly suppressed Huang Wu and Cheng Jiao. At the same time, Bai Jian ordered some flying swords to attack the 2 mountains, wanting to completely destroy them. Only when the mountains were completely destroyed would the array of the mountain be considered broken. After the efforts of Zhou and the others, the broken parts of the 2 mountains were opened up and turned into the 9 peaks origin array again. This caused Bai Jian to feel immense pressure. Under Bai Jian's full strength, he destroyed more than 100 flying swords and destroyed the mountain. Only then did some flaws appear in the 9 peaks origin array. As the master of the mountain, Cheng Jiao's fate was closely related to the mountain. When the mountain was destroyed, he immediately suffered some backlash. His expression became extremely ugly, as though he would collapse at any time. He was suffering unspeakably. Huang Wu held the halberd in his hand. Looking at these changes, he could not help but gasp subconsciously. Even though Bai Jian was also hit by his halberd and was seriously injured, the seemingly weak young man did not show any signs of collapsing. "Good kid, you really can take a beating." Huang Wu snorted coldly and said. Bai Jian did not say a word. If he opened his mouth, blood would probably flow out from the corner of his mouth. At the beginning, Bai Jian would still argue with them. Now his expression was solemn. This also made Huang Wu understand that his opponent was seriously injured and could not even spare the energy to speak. Cheng Jiao immediately returned to his mountain and began to stabilize his fate. He still wanted to make up for it. 1 mountain with 9 peaks naturally could not be changed. If it became 1 mountain with 8 peaks, how could it work? The Almighties of the Assemble Fire Alliance were also unusually united because, in their opinion, the foundation of 1 mountain with 9 peaks could not be shaken. Everyone immediately gave most of their power to Cheng Jiao to help him stabilize the broken mountain. Bai Jian raised his hand and split half of his flying swords, which directly flew towards Cheng Jiao's mountain. Obviously, he wanted to completely destroy the mountain. On the other side, the mountain river map had been completely unfolded, and the mysterious light it emitted was even more dazzling. At the same time, it also affected the fate of heaven and earth, causing the array to shake. A trace of flame slowly fell from the map. Chapter 2844. Kanglin and Qiu Di felt uneasy when they saw the wisp of flame shoot out. Although only a small part of the flame appeared, the scorching feeling it contained made them feel lingering fear. It was as if the flame was a natural restraint on them. They wanted to stop it, but it was too late and it seemed impossible. Unless the stately painting was completely destroyed, it would never be possible to do so. However, with their current abilities, it was still far from enough to destroy the stately painting. In fact, that was something that was impossible. Kanglin was unwilling to give up this possibility. He felt that doing nothing was the most terrifying thing. Naturally, Ming Yan had also sensed the changes in this place. However, there was nothing he could do now. He could only watch as everything happened. With Princess Mingzhu blocking his path, it could be said that she had cut off all his thoughts. After a few rounds of confrontation, Princess Mingzhu had many injuries on her body, but her aura did not weaken at all. It was as if she was still unscathed in such a big battle, which made people look askance. Now, who was the hope of the future? The masters of the One Mountain and Nine Peaks knew very well that all the opportunities were in their hands. It was just a matter of whether they could hold them firmly in their hands. Seeing that Kanglin wanted to stop it, Xiaoyang did not even look at him. Instead, he turned his hand and slashed at Qiu Di with his sword. Thunder roared as the sword slashed out. Countless thunderbolts turned into green dragons and surged toward Qiu Di. It was as if they carried the power of heaven and earth and were unmatched. After having such a feeling, Qiu Di suddenly realized that the stately painting that the other party had taken out was probably just a pretense to attract their attention. Qiu Di could not help but feel a chill in his heart at the thought of this. Xiaoyang was a person who was good at scheming. Qiu Di didn't dare to hesitate. He immediately unleashed all of his skills, wanting to block this punch no matter what. If he couldn't block it, his death would only be a matter of a moment. He knew what to do and did not dare to be careless. Countless flames surged out from Qiu Di's body, forming a huge amount of energy that blocked in front of him, allowing him to attack and defend. Too many things had happened in an instant. There was no time for Kanglin to return to help, so he could only bite the bullet and rush over to see if he could take the stately painting. Green thunder went straight for the root of the problem. The divine sword in Xiaoyang's hand flew out like a roaring azure dragon. For a time, rumbling sounds could be said to be incessant. Countless forces attacked each other, constantly exploding. Qiu Di gritted his teeth and persevered. He constantly mobilized the energy in his body and tried his best to block it. Just the green lightning sword chi alone was already so terrifying that it was difficult to resist. The pressure Qiu Di felt in his heart grew stronger and stronger. As time went by, Qiu Di seemed to be having a hard time even though he had the support of the other peak masters. It was as if his defeat was only a matter of moments. Suddenly, Xiaoyang disappeared. Qiu Di was even more puzzled in his heart. What was going on? Where did this guy go in the blink of an eye? Or rather, where was he hiding? One question after another appeared in each of their minds, but there was no answer for a long time. Be careful. He's behind you. When Qiu Di heard this voice, he also felt a ripple in the space behind him. He wanted to dodge, but it was too late. It seemed that there was no chance at all. After Xiaoyang appeared, he directly punched Qiu Di's head. Qiu Di couldn't withstand this huge force. He was hit until he was dizzy and fell down. Qiu Di's sea of consciousness was turbulent. His mind was blank, and he didn't know what to do. It seemed that everything was over. No matter what, it seemed empty and pale. Looking back on the past, Qiu Di relied on his identity as the peak master of the Gathering Fire Union to get whatever he wanted. He never thought that one day he would die in the place he relied on the most. At the same time, the divine sword pierced directly into Qiu Di's head. The life flame was flickering. Seeing that Qiu Di's life flame was not completely extinguished, Xiaoyang also ignored the pain in his body and immediately rushed down, ready to eliminate all future troubles. Qiu Di thought that he couldn't escape this time and would definitely die. Suddenly, his consciousness was stabilized and became clear. He took out the divine sword with one hand and threw it on the ground. Then he rushed to his peak at an extremely fast speed. Seeing that Qiu Di was trying his best to escape, and Zhou and the other peak masters also breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. Fortunately, their timely support didn't make the battle worse. Xiaoyang blasted away the surging attack with a punch. He glanced at it and didn't chase anymore. Instead, he casually grabbed the Thunder Fire Divine sword and it returned to his hand again. This formation is a bit interesting, Xiaoyang muttered, and his expression became a bit uglier. As long as he was still breathing, he could guarantee that he wouldn't die. Moreover, he could use the magical effect of the formation to quickly recover. This point was still a bit of a headache. On the other side, Kanglin screamed miserably and also returned to his peak at an extremely fast speed. His situation was not optimistic at all. His body was charred black. Lil Fire had already come out of the mountain river map. Although it was squeezed very hard by the power of heaven and earth here, Lil Fire was a heavenly fire and not a living person. It also didn't know pain and wouldn't be squeezed to death. Moreover, flames didn't have a fixed form in the first place. As long as there was a trace of a gap, it could scurry out. For a time, Kanglin and Chiodi were defeated one after another and returned to their peaks. All of this left everyone dumbstruck and shocked. This battle, up until now, seemed to have already been decided. If they continued to fight, it would be the same result. But how could Zhou and the rest possibly be convinced? Under the influence of the formation, they were even more connected in mind. They had to fight this battle and win. Otherwise, they would all die here. Only by fighting with all their might could they fight for a chance of survival. Xiao Yang looked around blankly. At the same time, he was calculating again in his heart how to fight next to be able to completely annihilate the Assemble Fire Alliance. Previously, they had been suppressed all along. But at this point, the situation already started to turn around. There was even a small chance of winning. Therefore, there was naturally no need to think of a way out anymore. Chapter 2845. After Lil Fire repelled Kanglin, it flew around Xiao Yang's body like a child, cheering excitedly. Lil Fire had not seen Xiao Yang for a long time. Ever since it ate Xianya the last time, Lil Fire had been digesting it. It was only a few days ago that it completely devoured it and turned it into its own strength. Xiao Yang looked at Lil Fire cheerfully and smiled with satisfaction. Fortunately, it was able to digest it in time. Otherwise, their current situation would be even worse. It could be said that if Lil Fire could attack in the Furious River Formation, then their situation would be much better. They would not be so powerless and in a deadlock. However, that was already in the past. It was daunting, but not dangerous. On the contrary, they needed Lil Fire's help now. After Ming Yan repelled Princess Mingzhu with one blow, the murderous aura between his brows also became more and more serious. Even though Princess Mingzhu had already broken through to rank 6 realm, compared to Ming Yan, there was still some gap. In addition, behind Ming Yan was the small world formed by this one mountain and 9 peaks. The power could be said to be inexhaustible and inexhaustible. He had the advantage. Princess Mingzhu also did not have Xiao Yang's physique. She had been hit repeatedly, and now her injuries were also very serious. If not for the mysterious yellow jade protecting her heart meridians, it would be very difficult for Princess Mingzhu to even stand up now. Ming Yan looked at the eccentric heavenly fire that was jumping around excitedly. His brows furrowed and his expression became very ugly. That scorching feeling made him very disgusted. He wished he could swallow it directly. Although the heavenly fire's aura was completely opposite to their flame world. In the end, they were all fire. It was just that different paths led to the same destination. If he could swallow that eccentric flame, his realm might be able to rise again. After having such a thought, Ming Yan's eyes also emitted a trace of heat. He used the God art with all his strength. Moreover, he used it excessively, causing some sequelae. If he swallowed Lil Fire, that would be a great tonic. It could even allow him to advance instead of retreat. Since then, there was an additional trace of greed in Ming Yan's eyes. This was indeed a very good idea and very feasible. After Xiao Yang felt that greedy gaze, he sneered and muttered, "It's still hard to say who will swallow who." Lil Fire seemed to also feel the other party's threat and instantly turned around, staring at Ming Yan. To Lil Fire, Ming Yan was also a great tonic. "I didn't expect that you actually have a fire in your hands. No wonder you dare to be so arrogant. Turns out that you have something to rely on. If I am unable to break through the realm, I will really fall into your trap." As Ming Yan spoke, his tone became more solemn. As soon as these words were spoken, Many people immediately had doubts about the destruction of the Mo family. Now those doubts had disappeared. Was Lil, S Lin, S Lil Yu, S Lil, S Lil, S he, S time, S S's, S SSS, S. Now that Lil Fire was here, he naturally didn't need to continue being alarmed. Princess Mingzhu naturally knew how powerful Lil Fire was, but she didn't dare to heave a sigh of relief in her heart. After all, this Ming Yan in front of her was many times stronger than Xianya. Destroy another mountain and let more heaven and earth's power of heaven and earth pour in. Xiao Yang transmitted to Princess Mingzhu using a secret method. Princess Mingzhu was seriously injured now. If she continued to fight, her injuries would become more and more serious. It might even be possible for her realm to drop. Xiao Yang also obtained some drifting cloud realms' power of heaven and earth after opening the mountain river map and recovered quite a bit. In addition, with Lil Fire's cooperation, he had nothing to fear now. Princess Mingzhu's expression froze. She sighed in the end and didn't refuse. Princess Mingzhu's injuries were very serious now, even to the extent of hurting her foundation. If she forced herself to hold on, she wouldn't get any benefits. On the other hand, she could still barely fight in other places. Xiao Yang looked at Ming Yan. He pondered for a moment in his heart and came up with some answers. As long as he could exhaust a little more and wait for the Emperor God to arrive, the situation would be set. Of course, it would be best if he could kill his opponent directly. Such hope was very slim. He could only give it a try. Whether he succeeded or not would depend on luck. In the battle with Princess Mingzhu, Ming Yan had also suffered serious injuries. Although he had the nourishment of 1 mountain and 9 peaks, it was still very slow. Moreover, how could some injuries be healed so easily? It seems like you guys are preparing to exhaust me to death by taking turns? Ming Yan laughed in disdain and said, such an idea was more or less whimsical. It could even be said to be unrealistic. Xiao Yang nodded indifferently and said, we did have such an idea previously. Ming Yan heard and laughed out loud. Such an idea could be said to be extremely stupid. In this world, he, Ming Yan, had inexhaustible power. Wanting to exhaust him to death, just like that? Wishful thinking. I did not expect you to be so stupid. Ming Yan laughed in disdain and said. Xiao Yang shrugged helplessly. Previously, he did not have any other ideas and could only do so. Until then, the possibilities that Xiao Yang could choose were still very few. However, the calculations in his heart had never stopped. He was very clear that he could only find a possibility from the countless impossibilities. Xiao Yang swung the sword in his hand, and countless green lightning appeared again. Fortunately, he had the support of the power of the drifting cloud realm. Otherwise, it would be difficult for him to perform such a powerful move again. Xiao Hu looked as if he was ready to attack and was eager to give it a try. In Lil Flame's eyes, the current Ming Yan was an incomparably delicious meal that would make one drool. If he could swallow him, Xiao Hu's power would increase tremendously again. He could even be compared to a 7th-level martial emperor. Xiao Yang took a deep breath and calmed himself down. At the same time, he was constantly thinking about what to do next. At this moment, the situation became tense again. In other words, no matter who was facing Ming Yan, it would be the most tense battle. But you are not too stupid. In order to get the heavenly fire, even if I have to pay a bigger price, it doesn't matter, Ming Yan said. Suddenly, there was a sharp look in his eyes. At this point, there was only one way to fight. Chapter 2846. I didn't expect this kid to have so many tricks up his sleeves. I can't see through him at all. And Zhou muttered and laughed at himself. However, he only felt a slight sense of danger. He didn't think that the Gathering Fire Alliance would definitely lose this time. It was inevitable that a few peak masters wouldn't be able to escape misfortune. However, and Zhou was at the back and didn't need to worry about such a problem at all. Ho Ji's mind trembled uncontrollably. Such a situation made his mind extremely restless and even a little fearful. All of a sudden, he was filled with resentment. If the mountain lord of Luoyan Mountain, Ping Chensheng, was willing to help them, things wouldn't have turned out this way. So what if the other party took out the heavenly fire? As long as they could hold him back and kill all three of them, the heavenly fire would naturally be useless. Looks like our 1 mountain and 9 peaks will be different after today, Ho Ji said with a little melancholy. At the same time, Ho Ji also hoped that the three of them could all deal with the Alliance Master. Only the Alliance Master would be able to withstand their attacks. Or rather, he only hoped that Xiao Yang's eyes would always be on the Alliance Master. That was the only way to prevent the peak leaders from being harmed, even if he went on a rampage. He might even have to pay the price with his life. And Zhou laughed bitterly. Now even Ho Ji could feel it. Naturally, it went without saying what the situation was. Let's take it one step at a time. And Zhou smiled bitterly. At this moment, Bai Jian and Huang Wu were fighting a few times. Cheng Jiao had also recovered from his injuries, but he couldn't help because he was surrounded by half of the flying swords and couldn't leave at all. He could only bitterly hold on. Huang Wu held the halberd in his hand and still looked insufferably arrogant. However, there were many sword scars on his body. Bai Jian's sword was extremely sharp. Fortunately, Huang Wu was brave to begin with and had the support of the formation, so he didn't fall. He even found an opportunity to severely injure Bai Jian. However, Huang Wu didn't expect that the jade-faced young man would be so strong and not show any signs of weakness. He had been holding on for a long time. Bai Jian knew very well that he had long reached his limit. However, he couldn't let go of his pride no matter what. Once this breath was gone, it would be difficult to continue. Coupled with the heavy injuries he had sustained, he would likely become a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. This was nothing, it was just a dead end. But if it involved Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu, then he would feel very uneasy. In Bai Jian's opinion, he would rather commit suicide than become an enemy that could threaten his friends. Even Bai Jian's hands were trembling. If it wasn't for the purity of his sword intent, it would have been extremely difficult for him to even hold his sword. Bai Jian also had his own pride. He would not fall so easily unless he completed his task. For instance, during the Battle of the Western Plains in the Sword Heart world, even though he failed to break through, he didn't give up on killing his enemies. His final fall only began after the curtains of the battle had been drawn. Even though Bai Jian did not open his mouth to speak, black blood continued to flow out of his mouth. Right now, the injuries in the jade-faced youth's body were simply uncontrollable. Bai Jian did not do anything else. He only raised the treasured sword in his hand and prepared to continue attacking. When Huang Wu saw that the jade-faced youth was about to continue attacking, his heart suddenly trembled. At the same time, he was also very impressed. Such an opponent was indeed worthy of respect. If it were anyone else, they would have already thought of their own way out and even started to do so. However, Bai Jian was different. He had been standing there all this time without moving at all. In that case, I'll send you to your death. Huang Wu shouted in a low voice. He raised the sky piercer again and prepared to rush over and kill him directly. Bai Jian only sneered. Countless flying swords lingered around his body and quickly condensed into a huge sword momentum. On the other side, Princess Mingzhu also forced herself to be alert and walked towards a mountain peak. Previously, Xiao Yang had made it clear that she still needed to break through a mountain peak. She had to do it. She didn't care about her injuries and just focused on attacking. Moreover, Princess Mingzhu had the mysterious yellow jade as her backing and support, so she had no worries at all. She could be willful. In the next moment, Kanglin immediately came out from his own mountain and blocked in front of her as if he was preparing to block Princess Mingzhu's attack. Seeing Kanglin's appearance, Princess Mingzhu frowned. These guys were really annoying. Kanglin had been injured several times, and even seriously injured several times. However, He relied on the convenience of the array to constantly recover and enter the battlefield. It could be said that he was haunting her. As long as they weren't directly killed, they could recover. Moreover, this was only one of the magical effects of the Nine Peaks origin array. However, half of Kanglin's body was still pitch black. How could the injuries left behind by Xiao Hu be so easy to completely recover? At the same time, Qiu Di also walked out. He was as good as new. However, the mountain peak behind Qiu Di withered a lot in the blink of an eye. Qiu Di's injuries had already damaged his foundation and needed to be completely recovered in a short period of time. Naturally, he would have to pay a huge price. The price was half of the prosperity of that mountain peak. Princess Mingzhu snorted coldly and waved the golden sword in her hand. Immediately, countless sword qi scattered down like autumn rain. The killing intent was difficult to conceal. At the same time, Princess Mingzhu also threw out a few golden swords. These small swords were the only things left from the attack method that Princess Mingzhu had prepared. Every small golden sword was equivalent to Princess Mingzhu's full power attack when she was in the 5th stage realm. Kanglin looked at the sky full of sword rain and couldn't help but feel fear in his heart. When he was in the 5th stage, it was already difficult to do anything. Now, how could he contend against it? Countless pains came, causing Xiao Yang's face to distort. Even the circulation of spirit power in his body became a problem because of the pain. Immediately, Xiao Yang steeled his heart and directly let the poison invade his heart meridian. In an instant, his lips and face were somewhat black. However, he didn't have any expression of pain. Because the poison had already numbed his senses, he used the poison to poison himself to stop the pain and ensure that he made a mistake because of it. With this poison control, Xiao Yang also calmed down a lot. At the same time, Xiao Hu also rushed over, preparing to directly take down Ming Yan. However, a hurricane suddenly swept up beside Ming Yan. It was very fierce, causing Xiao Hu to be unable to get close at all. Wind and fire were dependent on each other. Wind could bring fire and boost one's might. Similarly, it could also isolate. On the contrary, Ming Yan's aura seemed to be boosted and became more and more terrifying. It was so powerful that it made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Yin God's Punishment. Chapter 2847. In an instant, countless amounts of fate energy poured into Ming Yan's body. Even all the power in this world was like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, all belonging to him alone. Once this move was unleashed, the world changed color immediately, as if even this mountain and 9 peaks were trembling at the same time. An incomparably strong pressure, as if uncontrollable, erupted abruptly, extremely terrifying. Even the minds of the crowd trembled, and some found it difficult to continue, appearing extraordinarily terrified. And Zhou and Hoji even lowered their heads subconsciously, and even their legs began to tremble, as if they could not wait to kneel on the ground directly. This move brought about an even greater pressure on their minds, not to mention how much suppression these outsiders suffered, even in Zhou, Hoji, and the other peak masters, as part of the array formation, found it somewhat difficult to withstand such a huge power. From this, it could be seen how terrifying the power of this move was. After seeing the appearance of the heavenly fire, Ming Yan already knew that undue delay was ultimately fraught with problems. If he continued to delay, who knew what kind of move this little fellow would take out? So it was better to make him a real fool first. Using the Yin God's punishment in Ming Yan's current state was still rather strenuous. However, he did not hesitate to pay the price, and in addition to the array formation support, he succeeded. At the same time, Ming Yan also believed that under this attack, Xiao Yang would definitely be annihilated. At that time, the heavenly fire would become an ownerless object, and it would be much easier for him to subdue it. At this very moment, Xiao Yang's heart could not help but tighten. This was because he felt that if he really took this hit, he would definitely be smashed to pieces, and there was absolutely no reason for him to live. Even though his physique was extraordinary and his perseverance was extraordinary, under the suppression of absolute power, he still seemed to be somewhat powerless, and it was difficult for him to match up. Xiao Yang also felt a little helpless in his heart. Things had already come to this, so what could he do? Previously, he had thought of many contingency plans, but now, in front of this absolute power, he felt that his calculations were all wrong. There was no need for this kind of coping. Suddenly, Xiao Yang frowned and he conjured a seal. The thunder, fire divine sword floated in front of him, but did not move. Both of his hands immediately began to form hand seals, and the space around him began to form ripples. Brat, this old man wants to see what kind of ability you have to block this attack. Ming Yan said in a high and mighty manner, as if he was a deity who was about to pass judgment. At this moment, everything was silent, and a murderous aura filled the air. Even the other two battlefields were much quieter under such pressure. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, remained calm in the face of danger. Everything proceeded in an orderly manner. If he had the slightest bit of panic now, he was afraid that it would lead to failure or even death. It could be said that there was no room for error. Xiao Yang's eyes were also full of determination. He had no distracting thoughts and was only doing his own thing. It was as if nothing had anything to do with him. He was completely immersed in his own little world. Go and die! Ming Yan shouted in a low voice, directly passing down the sentence. He pressed down with his hand, and a huge palm print pressed down like the wrath of a demon god. When this palm landed, the heaven and earth changed color, and the 9 peaks of the mountain trembled. The sound of space exploding could be heard one after another, like firecrackers, which couldn't be stopped at all. As the target, Xiao Yang felt as if the heaven and earth were pressing down on his body. It was difficult to withstand, and his body could explode at any time. No matter whether it was his body or his heart, they were all under tremendous pressure. Even Xiao Yang's sea of consciousness began to surge with this attack, as if it could shatter at any time. It was also Xiao Yang's sea of consciousness that was more resilient. If it was not soft, cracks would have appeared long ago or even collapsed. Xiao Yang was also shocked in his heart. No matter what, he did not think that the power of this move would be so terrifying. If it really landed on his body, how terrifying would that be? This point could be said to be something completely unimaginable. In the face of imminent disaster, Xiao Yang still did not panic. Instead, he methodically drew a circle above his head. Ming Yan stared without blinking. He wanted to see what kind of storm this kid could still stir up. At this critical moment, Xiao Yang naturally would not do anything meaningless. However, Ming Yan was also very certain of his own methods. Even if Xiao Yang had some extraordinary methods, he would most likely not be able to withstand the power of this move. He could only die a violent death with hatred in his heart. Everyone's hearts were almost in their throats, and they subconsciously held their breaths. Xiao Yang was as if nothing had happened. He hovered there, as if the heaven and earth were to collapse, and his expression would not change. Greater teleportation technique. That incomparably terrifying palm strike struck the circle, but it slowly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, the fierce wind and torrential rain became light. Everyone had great doubts in their hearts, and they did not understand why it was like this. Did they see a ghost? Ming Yan's eyes widened to the size of copper bells. He felt as if he was hallucinating. But in the next moment, Ming Yan's heart trembled, because he saw the space above his head throbbing. At the same time, an extremely terrifying aura was being released. In the next moment, Ming Yan also let out a low roar, and countless amounts of energy surged upwards. But when that palm landed, his energy was like paper. It was useless and shattered in the blink of an eye. In that instant, Ming Yan's heart sank into despair. He knew that he could not block it. Boom! Boom! 2 loud sounds rang out, and Ming Yan was hit until he fell downwards. His vitality dissipated, and he could not maintain it. Xiaoyang was not in a good state either. He was directly smashed into the ground, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Ming Yan retreated step by step, but he was still trying his best to reduce the power of the Yin God's punishment. However, Xiaoyang's greater teleportation technique had reached perfection, and he had completely transferred 70% of his power to Ming Yan. How could he block it? His strength and vitality were flowing away crazily. Although he had the support of 1 mountain and 9 peaks, it was still difficult to block the power of his move. He could not make ends meet. Now, Ming Yan was almost in despair. He could not imagine why this would happen. The last bit of energy exploded, and Ming Yan was unable to withstand it. He completely lost his resistance and fell downwards. Ming Yan's flame of life was like a candle in the wind, and it could be extinguished at any time. But he was still glad that he still had a trace of hope. As long as he could gather the vitality and fate of 1 mountain and 9 peaks into his body, he could reverse the situation. In the next moment, Xiaohuo was like a ferocious beast, swallowing Ming Yan in one gulp. Chapter 2848. Seeing Ming Yan being swallowed by fiery in one gulp, Xiaoyang also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. No matter how great one's capabilities were, as long as one was eaten, then one could forget about coming out again. At least until now, the people that fiery swallowed had not been able to walk out again. This scene also made the 9 peak masters even more shocked in their hearts. How could they have thought that such an unforeseen event would actually occur? Their alliance chief was a rank 7 powerhouse, and he even had the support of the array formation. How could he be swallowed in this blink of an eye? And Zhou and Hoji even exchanged glances. They did not understand what was going on. What in the world was going on? The 2 people did not have an answer in their hearts. But there was no news coming from the main mountain. This point allowed them to confirm that the alliance chief had indeed encountered a problem. And what they saw was also not an illusion. It was incomparably real. This point made them unable to accept it no matter what. Everything happened too quickly. It could be said to be a sudden turn for the worse. The originally great situation where they could kill the external enemy in one stroke actually became the alliance chief's life and death unknown. Even Ming Yan, who was a rank 7 realm, was unable to contend with it. Then, if it was another person, it was naturally impossible too. The disparity involved was not just a little bit. Hoji was practically in despair. Could it be that their Assemble Fire Alliance was unable to escape a calamity today and only had a path to death? The more he thought like this, the more panic in Hoji's heart. If it was really like this, they would probably all have to give up here. This was completely bad news. Bad news that was hard for everyone to accept. Everyone's hearts were also very perturbed. At the same time, they also did not believe that the old alliance chief would pass away like this. In a blink of an eye, they also saw a trace of hope. Because after Fiery swallowed Ming Yan, some strange changes also occurred. Fiery started to lose control, rampaging inside the array formation as if it was possessed. Actually, this was also not strange. It was Ming Yan who was currently fighting inside Fiery's stomach, wanting to barge out a path under the rampaging. But how could all of this be so easy? But this scene made in Zhou and the rest see hope. Suppress that heavenly fire. Think of a way to help the alliance chief escape. And Zhou made a prompt decision and shouted loudly. Hearing this, the other peak leaders immediately came to their senses. They began to use their divine abilities and the power of the formation to pressure Xiaohua, trying to force him to spit out the person. However, Xiaohua didn't have much spiritual intelligence and was even a little stubborn. It took a lot of effort to swallow this delicious meal and hadn't digested it yet. How could it spit it out so easily? Xiaohua was rampaging in front of the main mountain. He looked extremely miserable, but he didn't seem to have any intention of giving up. Xiaoyang only glanced at him. He was seriously injured and was almost exhausted. If he wanted to continue fighting, even if he was willing to risk his life, it would be difficult for him to exert any effect. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to him, so Xiaoyang was able to enjoy some peace. To the gathering Fire Alliance, the life and death of Alliance leader Mingyan was the most important thing. Therefore, they had no time to care about Xiaoyang's life or death. Xiaoyang sat on the ground and used the last of his strength to protect his heart meridian. At the same time, he used the power of poison to numb his body to reduce the pain as much as possible. At the same time, Xiaoyang knew very well that even if Ming Yan died, this war couldn't come to an end. After all, the peak leaders of the 9 peaks weren't weak either. Among them, there was no lack of smart people. If they were allowed to escape or see any clues, then their situation would become very bad. Xiaoyang naturally knew what was more important and what to do. However, there were some things that were extremely easy to talk about, but it was very difficult to do them. It could be said that it was almost impossible. Even though Xiaoyang had already swallowed a few elixirs and adjusted them with the power of poison, the injuries on his body were too serious and couldn't be healed in a short period of time. Even the spiritual power in his body had begun to dissipate and was beginning to flow away. It was as if there were countless holes in his body. He wanted to block it, but there was no way to do so. As for whether Ming Yan would be able to escape from Xiao Hua's body, Xiaoyang wasn't worried at all about this. It wasn't that Xiao Hua was very powerful, but that Ming Yan was also seriously injured and probably couldn't unleash much of his strength. Furthermore, Xiao Hua had an attribute restraint against Ming Yan and had an absolute advantage over him. And Zhou was burning with anxiety. They had already used all their strength, but the effect wasn't much. Although they could slightly suppress the sky fire, they couldn't completely suppress it or force it to spit out Ming Yan. This made Zhou and the rest even more anxious. If this continued, what should they do? Everyone had countless doubts in their hearts. But at the same time, they could only do their best to play their role and hope that there would be some effect. As for other things, they really didn't have time to care about them. It could be said that Ming Yan was their strongest trump card and the key to victory. Once something happened to him, the consequences would naturally be unimaginable. Everyone's thoughts were very firm and they were almost doing their best. But the effect was very small. And Zhou, Hoji, and the rest were almost going crazy, but there was nothing they could do. They could only watch helplessly. The greater the hope invested, the easier it was to make one feel despair. Seeing that Xiao Hua's rebellion had begun to weaken, they already understood that Ming Yan was already at a disadvantage in the battle and was even being suppressed. That was why it was like this. However, they were unwilling to believe such an outcome and still seemed to be struggling to deceive themselves. That being said, there was very little that they could do in the first place. In an emergency situation, it was normal for people to place their hopes on one person. At the same time, everyone was very shocked. They really couldn't understand how things had turned out like this. With the cultivation of level 7 and the support of a unique formation, it could be said that victory was in their hands. However, in the blink of an eye, they didn't know what strange and brilliant magic the other party used. But it directly caused a huge change in the situation. Put in more effort. Ho Ji roared angrily and berated. They couldn't accept the situation of being destroyed, so they became a little crazy and wished that they could take Ming Yan's place to suffer this catastrophe. The other peak masters didn't dare to think too much and even used many methods at the same time in order to suppress the sky fire. However, the effect was almost useless. Chapter 2849. Putting in effort did not mean that one would definitely be rewarded. The 9 peak masters were currently facing such a situation. Their current actions could be said to be hysterical in order to save the old Alliance master. However, things did not go as they wished. No matter how hard they tried, the effect they could achieve in the end was so minimal that it could even be ignored. Anyone would feel very aggrieved if that were to fall on their shoulders and heart. Why did things turn out like this in the blink of an eye? No matter how they thought about it, it was impossible. He was invincible and even became the first person in the Inflame realm in tens of thousands of years. How could it end just like that? The more they thought about it, the more upset they felt. The more time passed, the heavier their moods became, and the more uncomfortable they felt. It was as if they were already well aware of many things but were unwilling to admit it. Perhaps they also felt that as long as they put in enough effort, they would definitely be rewarded. However, how could all of this be so simple? Lil Flame had already been suppressed to the point that it was stuck to the ground. It could not even move, but that was all. It was impossible to make him spit out Mingyan. At the same time, the corrosion of the Yin flame also dimmed Xiaohu's flame a lot. However, Xiaohu did not care at all because it knew very well that the current loss was negligible. As long as it could enjoy the delicious meal, its strength would definitely welcome a surge. Hence, what was the current loss of strength? Xiaohu was so shrewd that it calculated the score very clearly, and Zhou was trembling with fear as he watched. He also did not know the details and origin of the strange heavenly fire. He never thought that Xiaoyang actually had such a trick up his sleeve. If word of it got out, it would be somewhat shocking and even unbelievable. However, the truth was right in front of him. Even if he did not believe it, what could he do? Moreover, it had already happened. Even if he did not want to believe it, there was nothing he could do. At the same time, Zhou was also thinking in other directions. For example, if something really happened to the old Alliance Master, what should he do in the future? A series of questions also spread out in Zhou's mind. Although he wasn't willing to accept such an outcome, things didn't always go as planned. Therefore, the worst outcome still needed to be considered. He couldn't afford to be careless. The more he thought about it, the more aggrieved Zhou felt. Heavenly sword of evil. Suddenly a loud shout was heard. The jade-faced youth had only formed a sword seal, and the treasured sword in his hand had already disappeared. However, the countless flying swords all shot towards Huangwu. At the same time, an incomparably sharp sword qi descended from the sky, as if it had directly cut through the formation, and slashed towards the man holding the halberd. Although Xiaoyang had stopped, this battle was not over yet. Bai Jian and Princess Mingzhu were fighting a bloody battle. Huang Wu couldn't help but frown when he saw the sword energy descending from the sky. He felt an endless sense of danger. If he allowed this sword to land, then he would definitely not have a good time. However, as the strongest stage 5 of the Yin Flame world, Huang Wu had his own pride. Moreover, he had the support of the formation, so Huang Wu could be said to be fearless. Huang Wu rushed directly towards the sword qi. At the same time, the halberd in his hand shone brightly. At the same time, there was a relatively strong brilliance. Huang Wu took out his consummate skill in order to compete with Bai Jian. Although Huang Wu also occupied the advantage in this way, he didn't feel that he would lose face. At the same time, Huang Wu also felt very helpless and lucky. If the Yin Flame world had people like Xiaoyang, the title of the strongest stage 5 would definitely not fall on his shoulders. At this moment, Huang Wu didn't care so much. He just needed to attack. Sometimes, a person's heart was the most difficult to go against. Huang Wu respected such an opponent very much, and at the same time he appreciated it very much. Therefore, he wanted to fight to his heart's content. If they weren't mortal enemies, Huang Wu would be happy to become friends with these people. However, the world was unpredictable, and they stood on the opposite side. This was something that no one could change. Therefore, Huang Wu could only exert his ability with all his strength and fight to his heart's content. However, no matter how strong Huang Wu's momentum was, it seemed to be unable to block the sharpest sword light. His halberd slashed out a ray of light, but under the sword qi, it was directly cut into two. Bai Jian's sword was so sharp. The sword light flashed, and Huang Wu lowered his head in a daze. He looked at the tiny bloodlines that appeared on his chest, and his eyes were filled with shock. He couldn't imagine how sharp the sword edge was before, but now he experienced it. He didn't feel any pain, but his body had been cut in half. Several flying swords attacked, and Huang Wu's body was split apart. Bai Jian sat on the ground. He looked at the sky while panting, and a helpless smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. This sword was the last sword he could deliver in this battle, and now he was exhausted. He had done what he could. As for the outcome, it was up to Heaven's will. If Heaven's will was difficult to go against, he had no choice. Boom! Another loud sound. Under Princess Mingju's sword, she directly cut off Kanglin Mountain's head. In an instant, and Zhou and the others immediately reacted. Now, their formation was in a mess, and there were holes everywhere. They were no longer as strong as before. Moreover, the Alliance Master didn't even have the slightest struggle. He was probably doomed. Immediately, many peak masters began to retreat in their hearts. Now they were defeated, and it was very thorough. These 3 people were simply monsters, and they had endless means. Don't panic. And Zhou shouted, trying to stabilize the morale of the army. However, the others were not so calm in their hearts. At the same time, they lost their composure because of panic. What are you afraid of? Xiaoyang and Bai Jian have lost their combat strength. Now, only that woman has some strength left. Now is the best time to kill them. Everyone, don't miss this opportunity. And Zhou shouted loudly. And Zhou saw the situation very accurately. He knew that Huangwu was killed now, but Xiaoyang and Bai Jian didn't make any movements. Clearly, they paid too much and couldn't make a move anymore. If they wanted to take down the Assemble Fire Alliance, they would definitely have to pay a price. Moreover, the Alliance Master breaking through to rank 7 was also completely unexpected. Xiaoyang formed a seal, and the mountain river map emitted light again. Chapter 2850. After hearing in Zhou's words, the other peak masters immediately calmed down and were no longer as panicked as before. Thinking about it carefully, what Zhou said was true. Now that Xiaoyang and Bai Jian were exhausted and seriously injured, this was a great opportunity to kill them. How could they miss it? As for Princess Mingzhu, although she was still fighting with Kanglin and Qiu Di, it could be seen that she was more or less struggling. She was just a trapped beast putting up a desperate fight. If they could kill her now, they could avoid future troubles. As for what would happen to the 4 realms alliance behind them, it was not something they could worry about now. If they could kill the 3 of them first, it would be a blessing in disguise. But we have to maintain the formation. We can't spare any more manpower. Hoji said and fell silent. If it were not for this formation, they might not even be qualified to challenge the other party. In addition, Huang Wu, who was the best at fighting, had also lost his life. What else could they do? Although Kanglin still had battle strength, it was not enough. In addition, when they saw the stately painting rise again, it was inevitable for them to feel a little more panic in their hearts. After all, how could these things come to an end so easily? Now they were doing their best to suppress the strange flame. What would be released when the mountain river map opened this time? It could be said that the rise of the mountain river map was like a mountain pressing down on everyone's heart, causing them to be very worried. And Zhou's brows were almost twisted. He was also worried about this problem. Even his breathing began to become rapid. After all, the other party had shown a lot of means, which seemed to be endless. The mountain river map was like a dark cloud, shrouding all of them, making them feel desperate. Cheng Jiao, what are you waiting for? Go and kill that woman. And Zhou made a prompt decision and shouted. It was already very difficult for them to suppress the heavenly fire. How could they still have the strength to suppress the mountain river map? However, and Zhou knew that as long as they defeated the last woman who still had battle strength, the 3 of them would become fish on the chopping board. How to deal with them would depend on their mood. As for what would appear in the mountain river map, it was not something they could care about. Sometimes it was necessary to take a gamble. If it succeeded, then it would be a great thing. If he didn't even dare to gamble, then the final result would be a complete loss, or even a crushing defeat. In this aspect, and Zhou's calculations were extremely clear. Therefore, he didn't hold back and only hoped that he would be able to make the right bet this time. This was the only way for the alliance to continue existing. Otherwise, it would be destroyed. Hearing that, Chang Jiao did not dare to hesitate. He immediately rushed toward Princess Mingzhu. He wanted to combine all of his strength to kill her. However, just as Qing Jiao was about to move, she froze on the spot like a wooden chicken, because he felt an extremely terrifying aura appear, and it had already locked onto him. It was as if he would die as long as he moved. Right now, Chang Jiao's mental state was also very bad. It was as if she was in a mountain of swords and a sea of fire. She could not move an inch. And Zhou saw that Chang Jiao didn't move. Just as he was about to curse, he saw a person walk out of the painting. At a glance, that person gave off a majestic and inviolable aura of a king. After the emperor god walked out, he looked around and took in the scene of one mountain and 9 peaks. Then he took another look and saw the exhausted Xiaoyang and Bai Jian sitting on the ground like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Seeing that his daughter had already broken through to rank 6 and was the only one still standing and fighting, he smiled with satisfaction. She was indeed the emperor god's daughter. No matter when, the ability and responsibility that she displayed would definitely be the first to bear the brunt. The emperor god's body shone with golden light. He looked like a god, sacred and inviolable, and Zhou and the others looked at the middle-aged scholar with the aura of a king. They couldn't help but feel terrified in their hearts. They naturally had some news about this man. Back then, when the In-Flame World's army surrounded Chengdu, it was he who defeated the army with his own strength. At that time, the news that came back said that this man used some kind of secret technique, which was why he could have a rank 6 cultivation realm. However, after he appeared now, it made people feel a lot of emotions. Their previous thoughts were all wrong. The emperor god was this strong. He was so strong that it was unreasonable. As for why he didn't make a move previously, it was probably more out of disdain. When he thought of this, and Zhou felt somewhat sullen, a miscalculation, a complete miscalculation. Who would have thought that the benefits that were within their reach back then would end up sowing endless seeds of disaster for them in the end? I thought that you had already dealt with the matter properly, the emperor god said with a smile. Xiaoyang panted and said, "There's no other way. Ming Yan has broken through to rank 7 and is already completely out of our control." Hearing this, the emperor god's expression couldn't help but change. At the same time, he looked over and saw Xiaohua, who was pressed on the ground. He had a thoughtful look on his face and smiled. Xiaoyang was indeed Xiaoyang. It wasn't easy for him to fight the battle to this extent. Moreover, their array formation is also very strange. It completely isolates the power of heaven and earth. I've long wanted to invite you over, but if there isn't enough space, your cultivation will also be damaged if you come out. Xiaoyang's words were very reserved and his smile was very helpless. Xiaoyang had long wanted to invite the emperor god over, but unfortunately the situation didn't allow it. The god emperor merely smiled indifferently. He nodded and said, "Leave the rest to me." After he finished speaking, the emperor god's gaze landed on the 9 peaks. He looked down from above like a god looking down on all living things. In his hands, he determined the life and death of these ants. In an instant, and Zhou, Hoji, and the other peak masters couldn't help but feel their hearts tighten. They felt terror. Although the other party hadn't made a move yet, being looked at like this made their hair stand on end. It was very uncomfortable. It was as if they would be killed in the next moment. That pair of eyes was enough to make people tremble in fear. Even Songlan stopped. He looked at the high and mighty emperor god and subconsciously clenched his fists. They all wanted to resist, but there was only one answer in their hearts: despair. "Now, it's time to pay the debt of blood with blood," the emperor god shouted angrily and waved his hand. Chapter 28:51. As the emperor god waved his hand, everyone's heart sank. It was as if they felt an unprecedented suppression. They wanted to escape, but in the end they couldn't move at all. Under this immense pressure, Hoji's legs couldn't help but tremble. It was as if the heavens and earth were about to collapse. He was like a duckweed floating in the wind, unable to do anything. He could only go with the flow and wait for his own death. The divine emperor's actions seemed so casual, as though everything he had done was as light as a feather and completely useless. However, the fury and might that he displayed was something that the 9 peak masters couldn't resist. This power was like a flood that had broken through a dam. Once it was unleashed, it was impossible to stop it with just a single person. Sometimes the situation changed so quickly. Previously, Zhou was still encouraging everyone to take advantage of this opportunity to kill Xiaoyang and the other 2. Then they would be rid of all future troubles and wouldn't have to worry about how they would live in the future. However, the situation before their eyes had happened too quickly. No one could react in time, and they were filled with fear. They were all peak masters with high statuses and great abilities. However, even as matters stood, they were still unable to resist this great power. It was as if their high positions were like child's play in front of this god emperor. They were completely useless and could even be said to be unable to withstand a single blow. They were completely useless. From this moment onwards, the huge stone in Xiaoyang's heart could finally be lifted. He knew very well that once the emperor god arrived, all accidents would turn into nothingness. They had taken too much of a risk in this trip. If it weren't for the turn of events after careful planning, the 3 of them might have died there. Princess Mingzhu was still suspended high in the sky. At that moment, an extremely heavy feeling of fatigue struck her mind. Before this, she didn't dare to have such thoughts. She didn't even dare to relax in the slightest. After all, if she relaxed even a little, she might die. Hence, she could only persevere. That was the only way he could continue to live and not lose his life. However, although all of this sounded simple, the actual situation was very critical. Fortunately, they had held on until the very end, waiting for the arrival of the god emperor to turn the tide and change the situation. And Zhou also felt fear in his heart when he felt the power. However, he didn't want to fall just like that. Once he fell, he might not have a future. Thus, Zhou was extremely unwilling to accept this. Even though he was completely suppressed, he still didn't want to resign himself to death and wait for death to arrive. After all, if he died here, everything would be over. Whatever great achievements he had, they would all become nothing more than passing clouds. Go all out. And Zhou roared furiously. He immediately activated the power of the formation in an attempt to fight back. The only thing they could rely on was this formation. If they could control it well, they wouldn't just be waiting for death. Therefore, no matter what, they had to fight for it. If they could accept despair so easily, then Zhou wouldn't have gathered all the peak masters and acted as if they were ready to fight to the death. Even before Meng Yan came out of seclusion, he was already prepared to fight to the death. The fact that the Alliance Master had come out of seclusion was a pleasant surprise for them. Previously, they had placed all their bets on the Alliance Master. It was indeed worth it for them to do so. However, the final result wasn't what they wanted. So what? And Zhou exerted all his power. Immediately, the fate and power on the mountain peak gathered together. In the blink of an eye, it became a considerable power that almost protected the entire mountain peak. Ho, Ji, Qiu Di, and the others didn't dare to hesitate. They immediately exerted all their power. They could only find out the exact situation after they tried. In the past, the Yin Flame realm and the Wanshou realm worked together to destroy a medium realm. Which one of them wasn't a battle-hungry person? Every one of them had experienced great things. In fact, most of them had fought in those battles to obtain their current status and identity. Even though in terms of battle, it was inevitable that they would be unfamiliar with it because they had been in a high position for a long time, it didn't mean that they didn't have any abilities. All of a sudden, countless sounds of explosions rang out. The clash of power between the two had also begun. Immediately, Zhou felt despair. He was forced to retreat continuously. The 9 Peaks origin return formation was, in the end, pouring the fate and power of the 9 Peaks onto the main mountain to create an expert. However, the final result was that Meng Yan was engulfed by the flames. All the power left Xiaohua's body. Immediately, Xiao jumped up with a ferocious look. It was as if he couldn't wait to swallow the remaining peak masters. The God Emperor only glanced at it. He was a little surprised, because he felt that the power of the heavenly flame was not weak. In this way, it wasn't strange that Xiaoyang and the others could join forces to kill the rank 7 expert Mingyan. Countless explosions rang out. Some of the mountain peaks even began to shake. In a battle of power, there would naturally be a winner and a loser. In a moment, the weaker peak masters in Zhou and Hoji were shaken to the point that they sat on the ground, panting. However, and Zhou didn't despair. Instead, he was a little happy. With their combined strength, they finally blocked the attack. This also showed that the opponent wasn't invincible. Since they could resist, there was still a chance for them to turn the tables. Thinking of this, and Zhou's heart was filled with anticipation and joy. It was impossible to wait for death. If they could kill all the experts of the 4 Realm Alliance here, it wouldn't be too late to take revenge in the future. Thinking of this, and Zhou's heart became even more determined. Now, it was the key to victory and defeat. Xiaoyang only looked at them coldly. Soon after, he smiled bitterly. The Assemble Fire Union was indeed a force that had existed for tens of thousands of years. Its foundation couldn't be underestimated. It was reasonable that it could block the God Emperor's attack. However, the God Emperor was determined to kill them. This broken 9 Peaks origin return formation might not be able to save their lives. Therefore, there was no need to be anxious. The God Emperor only glanced at them indifferently and said, "This formation does have some power. I didn't expect such a barren place to have such a unique advantage. It's simply a miracle. However, so what if you can block this attack? Can you survive?" Hearing this, Qiu Di and the other peak masters were shocked and panicked. Chapter 2852. Hearing this, Qiu Di was even more terrified. He knew that if he continued to wait, it would probably be a dead end. But when he looked at the others, they did not have the intention to escape. His brows furrowed. Immediately, Qiu Di also understood the crux of the matter. Whoever fled first would probably be killed by this expert first. The bird that sticks out will definitely die first. Therefore, relying on the power of the formation now, they could still resist slightly. It was also a great opportunity to continue living. Songlan stared fixedly at the high and mighty Emperor God. His heart was filled with grief and indignation. In the past, it was always them who relied on their power to bully others. Today, all the limelight was suppressed by one person. Moreover, this was only a master of a small world. Now, and Zhou's view of small worlds had completely changed. At the same time, he was also very clear in his heart. If these people did not have true ability, how could they possibly raise their worlds from small worlds? If they did not have great ability, then it naturally would not work. Now that things had come to this, and Zhou also did not want to resign himself to fate. He felt that he could still fight. Perhaps the other party's current attitude was just putting on an act? Dealing with so many of them at once, the amount of energy needed would definitely be very terrifying. As long as they blocked a few rounds of attacks, it would not be too late to attack as a group when the other party's energy was more or less depleted. Who knew, they might even be able to obtain unexpected benefits in the end. Sometimes, one could not despair too early. Persevering a little would definitely bring unexpected benefits. However, just as the Emperor God's voice fell, an even more terrifying pressure attacked. Immediately, and Zhou's heart was close to despair. The pressure this time was who knows how many times stronger than the previous time. Even in Zhou's legs started to tremble involuntarily. That was completely caused by fear. As if he could not resist at all, it was extremely uncomfortable. Now that things had come to this, with an idea, and Zhou naturally would not shrink back in the slightest. Only by fighting to the end would they have a chance to survive. If they chose to flee from the beginning, then they would definitely lose. Even if 8 of them fled in all directions, there might be 1 or 2 people who could survive. But so what? If he wanted to succeed in the future, it would be impossible for him to do so. This family business would definitely be uprooted in the future. That was a situation that they were not willing to see. Now that there was an opportunity, he had to seize it. At this moment, Xiaoyang had also temporarily suppressed his injuries. He looked at the movements of the various mountain peaks, and the corners of his mouth revealed a helpless and bitter smile. The cycle of reincarnation had always been like this. When they chose to invade the Four Realms Alliance, they should have thought that they would face the risk of revenge one day. Suddenly, Qiu Di was the first to be unable to withstand the pressure and wanted to escape. Qiu Di turned around and ran. He felt that this was a great opportunity. Everyone was fighting against the Divine Emperor. If he didn't leave now, when would he leave? However, Qiu Di had just left his mountain peak. Less than 10 li away, he froze in place, his body suddenly refracting countless golden lights. In the blink of an eye, Qiu Di's body was torn into pieces, and blood and flesh continuously sprinkled down. A Tier 5 powerhouse fell just like that. The God Emperor did not even spare him a glance. It was as if all of this had nothing to do with him. And Zhou complained incessantly in his heart. This Qiu Di was so cowardly that he did not even know the situation. His rash escape had caused their formation to lose a peak. After this attack, the remaining 7 peak masters felt as if their chests had been hit by a heavy blow. They were in great pain, and their qi and blood were in turmoil. At the same time, on their peaks, all the cultivators below Tier 2 Martial Emperor died. And Zhou's heart was bleeding when he saw such a loss. The juniors left on the peaks were gone, just like that. Among them, there was no lack of outstanding juniors. They were the pillars of their lineage 10,000 years in the future. Just like that, they were gone. Although Zhou had previously allowed a few geniuses to leave the territory of the Fire Assembly Union in order to preserve their lineage, there were still geniuses among those who did not leave. This formation is missing another corner. How much longer can you resist? The God Emperor asked casually. Although he spoke casually, his words were like a huge rock that pressed down on their hearts. They were almost out of breath and felt extremely uncomfortable. And Zhou snorted coldly. He focused all his attention on mobilizing the power of the formation. He even wanted to counterattack. Since it was so difficult to passively defend, they might as well attack. Attacking was the best defense. At the same time, Zhou did not expect the God Emperor to not be suppressed by the Yin Flame realm. He could borrow the power of heaven and earth without any scruples. This was something that Zhou could not understand. However, since this was the case, he could only choose to cut off all means of retreat. You overestimate yourselves. The God Emperor laughed disdainfully and waved his sleeve again. Immediately, the attack that they had painstakingly gathered was crushed under the pressure of the power of heaven and earth. It did not cause any ripples. At this moment, Kang Lin, Cheng Jiao, and the others were in despair. The God Emperor seemed to be invincible. No matter what he did, he was so casual. However, the power that he displayed suppressed them to the point that they could not move. The 7 peak masters were in a terrible state of mind at this moment. They could not understand why things had turned out this way. Then the God Emperor attacked again. This time, the golden light that seemed to have materialized shot towards the 7 peak masters. Every ray of golden light was like an arrow that could take one's life. By now, the God Emperor had lost his patience. He also felt that it was time to put an end to this battle. Kang Lin looked at the golden light that was flying towards him. He used all his skills and the strength of a peak to block it. However, his strength seemed to be unable to withstand a single blow. Under the golden light, it was useless and was broken apart in an instant. Kang Lin, who was the closest, was the first to be hit by the golden light. In an instant, his eyes became unfocused. One hit, one kill. This was how domineering it was. The God Emperor had almost never attacked before. This time, the entire world was shocked. Countless peak masters were killed one after another. In the end, and Zhou used a secret technique to weaken the power of the golden light. However, it was inevitable that he would be severely injured. Seeing that things were not going well, and Zhou did not hesitate and immediately turned to flee. He was the furthest away and had the highest chance of leaving alive. Trying to escape right under my nose? Nonsense. The God Emperor snorted disdainfully. Then he turned into a ray of golden light and chased after Zhou. The position of a peak master was not low. Moreover, they had a death feud and would not rest until one of them was dead. Chapter 28:53. Seeing that the Emperor God had gone after Zhou, Xiaoyang did not dare to be careless. He immediately stood up and looked around to see if there were any other hidden threats. As the last survivor, Zhou escaped, the Nine Peaks origin returning array naturally disappeared because no one was controlling it. Wherever his divine consciousness went, he did not find a single living cultivator. Xiaoyang could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. The Emperor God's attack was so ruthless that all the living beings on the 9 peaks of the mountain had died in the blink of an eye. From this, it could be seen how strong the hatred and anger in the Emperor God's heart was. That was why he was so ruthless. When he thought of those innocent people who had died, tragically, it seemed to be reasonable. Moreover, they were much gentler and did not hurt any innocent people. Those who died were those who did not care about their own lives or those who participated in the war. It seemed to be reasonable for them to end up like this. "You heal first. I'll just watch," Princess Mingzhu said softly as she walked over. Among the 3 of them, only Princess Mingzhu was in the best condition. Moreover, she had the protection of the mysterious yellow jade, so she was able to preserve a lot of her strength. Xiaoyang only smiled and nodded. Then he sat down on the ground and did not care anymore. After such a big storm, those rascals probably did not dare to continue watching and ran away when they saw the Emperor God appear. Moreover, Xiaohuo was patrolling in the sky. If there were still people hiding in the dark, they would not be able to hide. After Xiaohuo swallowed Mingyan, it seemed to be difficult, but it still had some strength left. If Mingyan had not been hit by his attack and was severely injured, even if Xiaohuo swallowed him, it would not be as easy as it was now. In fact, it might even be more uncomfortable. Just a moment ago, the battle on the 1 mountain and 9 peaks was still extremely intense. Now it was as if there was a deathly stillness. There was almost no sound. In less than 10 minutes, the Emperor God returned. Looking at his relaxed appearance, one could imagine that even if Zhou was somewhat capable, it was almost impossible for him to escape from the Emperor God's hands. He had already lost his life. With Xiang's death, even if the Fire Assembly Union still had many cultivators alive, but without a leader it would be difficult for them to achieve anything big. In the end, they would only end up like the Mo family. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. In the future, the falling flame mountain would expand in one fell swoop and take over the entire Yin flame realm. Then it would be almost impossible for the remnants of the gathering fire union to rise again. The overall situation had been decided, and this trip to the Yin flame world could be considered a success. Xiaoyang also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Divine Emperor walked over calmly and took out a few bottles of pills. He gave them to Xiaoyang and Baijian and said, "These pills can temporarily stabilize your injuries." Xiaoyang and Baijian were not long-winded. They swallowed it immediately after receiving it. The pills given by the God Emperor were naturally of the highest quality. It was already an understatement to say that they had the effect of regrowing flesh and bones. The God Emperor looked at Xiaoyang with some admiration. He was very satisfied with a junior like him. If it weren't for Xiaoyang forcefully holding the fort while he was in seclusion, who knew what would have happened to the 4-realm alliance? It could be said that if it weren't for Xiaoyang, the God Emperor would not have been so comfortable in seclusion. Naturally, he would not have been able to reach his current level of cultivation and strength. Want to make the final decision? That was something that was almost impossible. "You're very impressive." The God Emperor smiled with great satisfaction. Xiaoyang and Bai Jian only smiled bitterly. If it were in the past, Bai Jian would have been extremely excited. What an honor it was to be acknowledged by the greatest person in the 3,000 minor worlds. However, it seemed that this was the case now. There was no need to take it to heart. The God Emperor did not say much. He directly let Xiaoyang and Bai Jian borrow the power of the pills to suppress their injuries first. As for the specific details of the war, he would let Princess Mingzhu explain it to him. The God Emperor was still rather concerned about the attitude of the Inflame world. This enmity had already been formed. If they could settle the score as soon as possible, it would be fine. If something unexpected happened in the future, it would be rather troublesome. The God Emperor did not wish for such a situation to occur. If he could resolve it, he would do so as soon as possible. 2 hours later, Xiaoyang barely managed to stabilize his injuries. What do you plan to do with the falling flame mountain? Although there's something strange there, I'm still confident in taking them down. The God Emperor asked. In the God Emperor's opinion, it would be best to destroy the falling flame mountain in one go. Xiaoyang shook his head. The Lord of the Falling Flame Mountain has already promised me that as long as we destroy the Gathering Fire Alliance, they'll be the first to submit to us. The God Emperor frowned slightly because he felt that such an approach was akin to nurturing a tiger and inviting calamity. Although the Falling Flame Mountain might not be able to do anything in the end, it was better to be safe than sorry. Perhaps the Falling Flame Mountain would be that one. So what if we destroy the Falling Flame Mountain? In the end, the Inflame world will definitely view us as enemies. Can we still be ruthless? Let the Falling Flame Mountain dominate and unify the Inflame world. We can also shift many conflicts to the Falling Flame Mountain. Let them manage their own people and be dissatisfied with their own people. Wouldn't that be perfect? Xiaoyang seemed to have seen through the God Emperor's doubts and said with a smile. Hearing this, the God Emperor's expression immediately became much more relaxed. He was even more satisfied with Xiaoyang's way of shifting conflicts. At the same time, the God Emperor was even more pleasantly surprised. Regarding how to conduct oneself in the world, it seemed like this young man had never disappointed him before. The God Emperor was also very curious. How formidable was Xiaoyang's master, who had never shown his face, to be able to teach such a formidable disciple? Then how should we deal with Nan Hong? The God Emperor asked. Xiaoyang shrugged and said, this person pays attention to the state of mind. If his thoughts change one day, he might not even be able to pass the hurdle in his heart. In the future, he'll be able to accomplish something and won't be a threat to us. Xiaoyang had seen a lot of people's hearts, so he could even somewhat control the thoughts and actions of some people. The reason why he was so certain about Nan Hong was that he had obtained the destiny of heaven and earth with his pure and innocent heart. If there came a day when his state of mind changed, it might be difficult for him to be favored again. You're the one who initiated this battle, and you've succeeded. As for how to deal with this matter, just let Master Xiao arrange it, the God Emperor said with a smile. Since Xiaoyang had already seen through these matters and made arrangements, the God Emperor felt that it was fine for him to act as a hired thug and show off his might here. If he could avoid worrying about something, he naturally didn't need to. Chapter 2854. The news of the annihilation of the Assemble Fire Union, the death of the One Mountain, 9 peaks and 10 great powerhouses and countless disciples losing their lives spread like wildfire in the Inflame realm. When Zhou failed to escape the pursuit, he was captured by the God Emperor before he could even leave the 100 Mountains. He was tortured to death. When the other peaks saw that the main peak was gone, they didn't dare to hesitate and immediately fled in all directions. Every cultivator knew that even the Alliance Master and the 9 Peak Masters had given up. What was the use of them continuing to occupy their own peaks? The current Assemble Fire Union was like purgatory on Earth. No one dared to stay for a moment because they knew very well that if they continued to stay, it would be a dead end. If they left earlier, they might be able to save their lives. No matter how much resentment and injustice they felt in their hearts, they didn't dare to joke around with their lives. After all, if they were the slightest bit careless, they would definitely lose their lives. They had seen the methods of those outsiders very clearly. The Mo family was a good example, so there was no need for them to continue staying here. Only by leaving this place as soon as possible would he be able to save his little life. No matter how hot-blooded some people were, they had no choice but to bow their heads in front of the general trend. If they really threw their lives away because of a moment of impulse, it would be too late to regret it. Which was more important? Just by thinking about it, they would naturally have an answer. The news of this battle also quickly spread. After all, there were many key points and many things that didn't make sense. Naturally, some words became more and more outrageous. It was also these words that caused the Een Flame realm to be completely shrouded in a layer of dark clouds. It could be said that every cultivator was complaining incessantly in their hearts. In the past, although their Een Flame realm was invaded by the Myriad Beast realm, it wasn't so tragic. They fought back and forth, so there was no need to worry about crossing the Furious River. However, not only did the three outsiders cross the Furious River, but they also directly annihilated the Assemble Fire Union. Although many people escaped from the 100 peaks of the Assemble Fire Union without any losses, the main force of cultivators had always been in the 1 mountain and 9 peaks. Even if the 100 mountains still existed, the Fire Gathering Union would only exist in name and wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Many people began to feel fear in their hearts. They were also afraid. They didn't know what had happened. They could only live in fear all day long. Many cultivators became even more fearful of these three outsiders. They were even worried that the Een Flame world would end up like that world. Just thinking about it made everyone's state of mind become incomparably terrible. They even felt that everything would not end so easily. Perhaps there was an even worse possibility. Many people felt even more despair in their hearts. Some forces even began to consider whether they should leave the Een Flame realm and go to other worlds to survive. At the same time, it could be said that there were curses everywhere. Everyone felt that it was the Mo family and the Fire Gathering Union who had caused this trouble. If they didn't take the initiative to provoke the Four Realms Alliance, how could today's disaster happen? If it was in the past, these people would definitely not dare to scold him. This was because they knew very well that if they wanted to say that they were the sun in the sky, they would be courting death. However, the situation was different now. Even if the two great forces were destroyed, the remaining survivors wouldn't be able to do anything. Most people didn't even dare to call themselves that for fear of causing trouble for themselves. There were even some who agreed and cursed after hearing it. There were also many cultivators who looked at the fallen Flame Mountain. This was because in this war they didn't seem to have contributed anything other than the Soon brothers. As a result, the fallen Flame Mountain could be considered as the sole survivor of the three great forces in the Een Flame world. This also made many people worried. If the fallen Flame Mountain also fell because of this, perhaps the only face of the Een Flame world would also disappear. Henceforth, the strength of the Een Flame world would completely fall to the bottom. They might not be able to recover from this setback and could only wait for the arrival of destruction. Many people were calculating whether or not the Luoyan mountain would be destroyed by the three outsiders. This was also what they were most concerned about. However, this matter was only a guess. Whether it would become reality or not was something that no one could say for sure. After all, the situation had always been ever-changing. No one could see through the style of the three outsiders. Although the Een Flame world didn't offend any forces other than the Mo family's forces and the Assemble Fire Alliance, the situation back then was very different from now. The Assemble Fire Alliance was the most powerful existence among all the forces in the Een Flame world. Now that this colossus had fallen, the fallen Flame Mountain naturally seemed a little lonely and couldn't continue to exist. Currently, many people in the fallen Flame Mountain were indeed in fear. They felt that they might be the ones to suffer a great disaster next. It was as if there was a sharp blade hanging above their heads that could fall at any time and take their lives. The more they thought about it, the more panicked they felt. However, as the Mountain Master, Ping Qinsheng was still leisurely sipping tea in the small pavilion. It was as if he was unmoved, even though a great disaster was about to befall them. In fact, Ping Qinsheng wasn't worried at all. He even knew very well that it was meaningless no matter how much he thought about it. After all, there were many things that couldn't be explained in a few words. At the same time, he also believed in Xiao Yang's character. Since he said he would do it, he would do it. Otherwise, Nan Hong wouldn't have come to the fallen flame mountain alive and even become his disciple. Ping Qinsheng seemed a little depressed as he thought about this. This was because he felt that the matter in front of him really made him feel a little sad. Back then, he, Mo Jiao, and Ming Yan were known as the three elites. They even worked together to kill a powerhouse from the myriad beast realm. At that time, they were still good friends. However, things had changed now. The only person who was still alive was Ping Qinsheng, the Ping Qinsheng that was hidden the most deeply. Although they later took charge of their own forces and became estranged because of their interests, their feelings in the past were real. The general trend was like this, and they had no choice but to do so. Ping Qinsheng felt helpless as he thought about this. If it was in the past, Ping Qinsheng would definitely go straight to Xiaoyang to fight. However, Ping Qinsheng now had the entire fallen flame mountain on his shoulders. He had to think carefully about his actions and couldn't act rashly. Chapter 28:55. Ping Qinsheng could only smile bitterly when he thought about the past. Previously, when Ming Yan successfully broke through to the 7th stage, it made people think that the Converging Fire Alliance would survive this crisis unscathed. As for the three outsiders, they would definitely lose their lives. Then, Ming Yan used his absolute advantage to suppress the falling flame mountain, and even used this as an excuse to suppress them. Then he would take care of the central territory and gradually unify the Yin Flame world. At that time, Ping Qinsheng was also thinking of a way out for himself. However, he didn't expect that he was just worrying about nothing. Therefore, Ping Qinsheng was even more fearful of Xiaoyang. Even then, they could still destroy the Converging Fire Alliance. This showed how terrifying their strength was. If the falling flame mountain really provoked them, they wouldn't have a good ending in the end. Fortunately, Ping Qinsheng made the right bet this time and had a chance to show off his skills. Since the Mo family and the Converging Fire Alliance had been destroyed, the falling flame mountain had taken the lead. Then, wouldn't it be easy to unify the Yin Flame world and become the master of this world? Even if the road ahead was going to be bumpy, so what? At least to Ping Qinsheng, it didn't matter. As long as he could endure it, it wouldn't be a problem. A short period of pain was still bearable. Sometimes, one had to look at the long term. Only in this way would he be able to sort out everything clearly and smoothly. It seemed that this was how it was to make huge profits with little capital. Moreover, the falling flame mountain didn't suffer any losses in this turmoil. The Soon brothers' death was because they had a problem with their heads. They had brought about their own deaths. They couldn't blame anyone else. If Xiaoyang had taken the initiative to find the Soon brothers and kill them, it would be fine. However, the two of them took the initiative to find trouble with him. Wasn't that just courting death? Strength was respected. This was a truth that had never changed since ancient times. The blockhead stood at the side with a displeased expression. Previously, when he knew that the leader of the Converging Fire Alliance had broken through to the 7th stage, he was very happy. He could finally kill the three vicious outsiders. However, when the news of the Converging Fire Alliance's destruction spread, the blockhead became even more displeased. It could even be said that he was very uncomfortable. He watched as the Fire Alliance was destroyed without doing anything. This made him feel very helpless and disappointed. Do you think that the outcome will change if we go? Ping Qinsheng sighed and said. The blockhead frowned slightly. He was also thinking about this problem. In his opinion, if he went to help, he could increase his chances. If he didn't go, he would be destroying his only chance. Ping Qinsheng sighed helplessly as he looked at this silly disciple of his. This fellow had always been one-track minded. It was impossible for him to see through the situation. In fact, it could even be said that it was almost impossible. So what if we go? I heard that in the end, Xiaoyang invited a mighty figure, whose realm is still uncertain. However, he can easily kill the peak master of the 9 peaks. Do you think he's weak? Ping Qinxing asked. The blockhead frowned. He did not know how to answer. If they didn't think of a way out and a plan to deal with it, how could they go into danger alone? Xiaoyang isn't a fool. In fact, he's very quick-witted. Ping Qinxing was very patient with this silly disciple of his. Ping Qinxing had seen many schemes against each other. He liked such a simple-minded person. We'll only know when we fight, the blockhead said angrily. Ping Qinxing smiled and shook his head. He said, Do you know why I didn't mention going to the Converging Fire Alliance after seeing Nanhong? The blockhead was stunned when he heard this. Before this, Xiaoyang had already come by and told me about the gathering of the karmic luck. At that time, he told me not to get involved and to just watch the show, Ping Qinxing said. The blockhead's eyes widened when he heard this. What's going on? Master colluded with outsiders? This thought exploded in the blockhead's mind. He simply could not believe it. How could this be? Everything had happened too quickly, and the blockhead could not accept it. Previously, he had been worried that the falling flame mountain would be the next to suffer. However, it seemed like there was no need for him to worry about this problem. It was completely groundless. Xiaoyang is quite magnanimous. He said that he's only seeking revenge, so he's seeking revenge. Why should we get involved? Ping Qinxing smiled bitterly. Master, why is that so? The blockhead asked unhappily. Ping Qinxing poured tea and said, If I get involved, the falling flame mountain will have to pay the price of being destroyed. At that time, Xiaoyang can support a puppet and take down the Yin Flame world. Ping Qinxing sighed after he finished speaking. He felt that this was very likely. The blockhead was still unhappy when he heard this, but his expression became much better. In the future, the falling flame mountain's days won't be easy. Many people will point at us and scold us. Ping Qinxing smiled bitterly and sighed. Ping Qinxing knew how strong the other party was, so he naturally did not dare to be unyielding. After the battle ended, the God Emperor brought Bai Jian back through the mountain and river map. After all, the Four Realms Alliance had not had an expert overseeing it for a long time. The God Emperor was still worried. The Yin Flame world's matter had come to an end, so there was nothing to worry about. However, there were some follow-up matters that needed to be dealt with, so Xiaoyang stayed behind. The God Emperor was also worried about this. He did not trust the Yin Flame world, so he left Princess Mingzhu behind to guard Xiaoyang in case of any accidents. Xiaoyang's injuries were very serious. If the person from the falling flame mountain came, then Xiaoyang's life might be lost here. Princess Mingzhu's injuries were relatively lighter. In addition, she had broken through and was protected by the mysterious yellow jade. With her around, there would be fewer accidents. After the God Emperor left, Xiaoyang did not rush to the falling flame mountain. Instead, he stayed where he was to rest and recover from his injuries. This was the main battlefield, but everyone was afraid and did not dare to rashly come here. Therefore, the risk of staying here was much lower. As for the Yin Flame world's current situation, Xiaoyang did not care. However, he could estimate it. He understood people's hearts. Most of the time, there was no need to rush. He only needed to wait. As for the problems in the future, that was a matter for the future. Recovering from his injuries was the most important thing. Who could predict that Ping Qinxing would not suddenly go back on his words and kill him when he was unprepared? Trusting others so easily was equivalent to digging one's own grave. Chapter 2856. A few days had passed, and Xiaoyang's injuries had temporarily stabilized. His strength had also recovered quite a bit. It was still relatively difficult for him to fully recover. At the very least, he would need half a year to fully recover. In this great battle, Xiaoyang's body had consumed a lot of vitality to be able to use the method of giving Ming and a taste of his own medicine. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, he would have already lost his life there. However, there was no harm in damaging his vitality. The general situation of the in-flame world could be said to be settled. So what if there were still some disturbances? It would not be able to stir up any storms. Even if there were more storms, he could handle it. Even if he could not, wasn't there still Princess Mingzhu? You recovered so quickly. Princess Mingzhu asked in surprise. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded. In his opinion, it was enough for him to recover to this extent. Of course, Xiaoyang also had his own selfish reasons for staying here. He wanted to take the 1 mountain and 9 peaks into his bag. The 9 peaks origin formation was naturally formed. It could be said to be a great formation given by the heavens. If he could refine it and make it into his own magic tool, it would not be bad. In addition, with the mountain river map, it was equivalent to bringing along a formation or domain no matter where he went. In the future, if he encountered experts, he could trap them. As long as they were not ridiculously strong, he would have the power to fight. The flying cloud mountain could suppress the furious river. If he could obtain the 1 mountain and 9 peaks, it would be wonderful. As for the broken mountain peaks and the missing parts, he was not worried at all. He knew that he could leave it to the spirit of the world and let it slowly recover. When are we going to the falling flame mountain? Princess Mingzhu asked. Xiaoyang frowned. After thinking for a while, he said, "There's no hurry now. It won't be too late to leave after I put the 1 mountain and 9 peaks into the mountain river map." Hearing that, Princess Mingzhu was stunned for a moment. Then she smiled bitterly. It seemed that Xiaoyang was really lacking magic tools and treasures. Now he could not even pass these mountain peaks. Everywhere it passed, not a single blade of grass grew. This was a little interesting. But then again, if it weren't for Xiaoyang's careful planning and obtaining resources from many places, who knows how long it would have taken for the barren, flowing cloud world to develop. The god realm was rich in natural resources, and many things were endless. Therefore, Princess Mingzhu didn't need to worry about these things. Why should they plunder other places when they couldn't even use up their own resources? However, the flowing cloud world was different. It had always been relatively barren. Without the influx of resources from the outside world, it was completely impossible for it to develop and make a comeback. On this point, Princess Mingzhu admired Xiaoyang quite a bit. To be able to pull a broken small world to such an extent, it was indeed very impressive. There were many barren lands like the Flowing Cloud Realm in the 3,000 small worlds, but only the Flowing Cloud Realm had come to the middle world. Since when did the other worlds ever show the slightest bit of glory? How confident are you? Princess Mingzhu asked softly. Xiaoyang thought for a moment and said, "If you are willing to help me, I can refine them all in 3 days." Princess Mingzhu nodded. It wasn't impossible for her to help. However, she still didn't know what the situation in the in-flame world was like. As for what to do in the future, they had already discussed a countermeasure. However, since it hadn't been implemented, it could only be regarded as empty talk. "Small problem," Princess Mingzhu said. Xiaoyang nodded and immediately took out the mountain river map, preparing to refine it. Seeing this, Princess Mingzhu immediately rose up and stood in the sky. She took out the mysterious yellow jade, and a faint golden light sprinkled down. When the golden light sprinkled down, the originally dark place became much brighter. When the cultivators in the distance saw the golden light sprinkling down, they instantly panicked and started to move away. They didn't know what was wrong with the appearance of the mountain river map and the golden light sprinkling down. They only sensed danger and subconsciously moved away. The reason why Xiaoyang could refine the Flying Cloud Mountain so quickly last time was because it was only 1 mountain. However, what he needed to refine now was 1 mountain with 9 peaks. Compared to the Flying Cloud Mountain, it was many times stronger. It was more than 10 times stronger. Besides, he also needed to protect the roots and veins here. If he was careless, the power of the mountain with 9 peaks would be greatly reduced. If the damage was too great, the power would not be as strong as before. Xiao Yang really didn't think much of it. Therefore, he had to be careful. He didn't dare to neglect any detail. If he wanted to be careful in every detail and not make any mistakes, it would require a lot of mental strength and energy. Xiao Yang's injuries had yet to recover, and he had already made such a bold move. Such an action would more or less hurt himself. Fortunately, Princess Mingzhu used the mysterious yellow jade to protect him. Otherwise, if he forced himself to do it, his injuries would only become more serious. In fact, it might even reach a point of no return in the end. Looking at how focused Xiao Yang was, Princess Mingzhu sighed helplessly. Xiao Yang was born in a remote village in the drifting cloud world. If he was born in the realm of the gods, with his talent and tenacity, how terrifying would he be now? One step slower, one step slower. This was an unchanging truth among cultivators. Back then, Princess Mingzhu left everyone in the dust in the realm of the gods and became an unreachable existence. Until now, Princess Mingzhu was the same. There was almost no one in the younger generation who could be compared to her. Even the experts of the older generation, Emperor Qin, couldn't be compared to her. I'm very curious. How did you reach this step? Princess Mingzhu asked with a smile. Princess Mingzhu was indeed very curious about this young man. Xiao Yang frowned slightly. He didn't expect Princess Mingzhu to ask such a question. When he looked up, all he saw was passion and curiosity. After going through so many things, Princess Mingzhu felt that among the same generation, only Xiao Yang could be compared to her. Although Bai Jian wasn't bad, he was too unconventional, and his abilities were obviously very different. His sword was sharp, but in terms of other abilities, he might not even be comparable to a normal martial emperor. However, to be able to reach the pinnacle of a certain point was also an incredible thing. It's very simple. Set a lofty goal for yourself. Then do your best to achieve it, Xiao Yang said as if he was joking. Such an answer was very easy, but Princess Mingzhu sighed. Xiao Yang did do that, so it wasn't easy for him. Chapter 28:57. In a certain cave residence, a handsome man in a brocade robe sat cross-legged. There was a dense aura lingering around him, which was an auspicious sign. This immortal's cave was even more luxuriously decorated. All kinds of exquisite spirit tools were placed neatly everywhere, as if they were small objects. These small items looked ordinary, but there were many details to them. None of the items were extra, and they fell at just the right time. Every small object was interlocked, forming a formation that condensed spiritual power. All of them were poured into the handsome man's body. Being able to cultivate in this formation had always been twice the result with half the effort. There were endless benefits. If one was not a unique genius in the sect, they would not receive such treatment. Thus, it could be seen that this handsome man's status in the sect was not bad. Suddenly, the handsome man opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of blood. His expression was full of shock. The man hurriedly took out an object from his arms. It was a crystal with a trace of flame inside. However, the flame seemed to have dimmed, as if it had been extinguished. Although it had a form, it was no longer alive. In the next moment, the crystal in the man's hand shattered, turning into powder and drifting away. Seeing this scene, the man's expression became even more embarrassed, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. What's going on? A while ago, it was burning vigorously, and there were signs of a breakthrough. Why is the flame of life extinguished today? As the man spoke, he could not help but gasp. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Now the man felt a little dazed, as if everything was unreal. Could it be that I used some secret method to force a breakthrough, and the previous situation was just a momentary recovery of consciousness? The man muttered in his heart, and then shook his head to deny it. This was because the previous strange phenomenon was gradual, and it was not a momentary recovery of consciousness. Suddenly, the man could no longer sit still. He stood up abruptly and walked out of the cave residence. This was because he felt that this matter was definitely not as simple as he imagined. However, as for what was going on, he could only have an answer after seeing it with his own eyes. Now that he was sitting here, it was impossible to get any information. As soon as he left the cave, a boy pulled the man back and asked anxiously, "Senior brother, what's wrong?" This is the critical moment of your closed-door cultivation. How can you rashly come out? The handsome man only glanced at the boy before shaking his head and sighing. "Junior brother, something happened to my family. I'll have to trouble you to report to master when I return." After he finished speaking, the man flung his hand away and turned into a meteor, flying toward the sky. The boy was even more puzzled when he saw this. What had happened at this critical juncture that could actually make senior brother leave in a fit of anger? The boy scratched his head in confusion. He really couldn't understand what was going on. However, this was the first time he had seen his senior brother leave in such a hurry. If it wasn't a big deal, how could he lose his composure like this? That shouldn't be the case. I came here with good intentions to guard the door for senior brother. Why would he be angry with me? The boy pouted, clearly unhappy. The boy couldn't figure out what was going on, so he walked down the mountain and asked his master. However, before the boy could move, he saw a beam of light shoot up into the sky and go in the direction where his senior brother disappeared. "All right, what can be hidden from master?" The boy mumbled a few words, then turned around and walked up the mountain. After 3 days of refining, Xiaoyang also managed to store 1 mountain and 9 peaks into the mountain river map. The area occupied by 1 mountain and 9 peaks was not small at all. It could even be said that there was a lot of space. Therefore, Xiaoyang spent a lot of effort to barely do it. Fortunately, he was able to succeed with Princess Mingzhu's help. Without Princess Mingzhu's help, Xiaoyang would probably have to wait for his injuries to recover before he dared to take action. Otherwise, the gains would not make up for the losses. Due to the inclusion of 1 mountain and 9 peaks, the mountain river map had been expanded once again, and its grade had also been raised. It was a pity that although the mountain river map was of a very high grade and stored many things, there were still some imperfections. For example, if he wanted to use it in a battle, the effect was not great, but it was not small either. However, Xiaoyang was still satisfied. He patted it with satisfaction like a landlord. At the same time, it also made people look forward to it. If he continued refining, what grade would the mountain river map be refined to? By then, would the small world inside be comparable to a world? This was completely possible. As long as enough things were refined, it could be done. Your mountain river map is really not simple. It has so many wonderful uses that it's not inferior to my father's 10 Directions, 8 Wastelands map, Princess Mingzhu said. Xiaoyang nodded with a smile and did not deny it. It's still a little inferior to the 10 Directions, 8 Wastelands map, Xiaoyang said after thinking for a while. The reason why he said so was very simple. The 10 Directions, 8 Wastelands map was relatively stable, but the mountain river map was not. There were still many risks in it. However, as long as there was enough time to refine it and eliminate all unstable factors, then it could be comparable. It's just a matter of time, Princess Mingzhu said. In these few operations, Princess Mingzhu also saw many clues. She also knew that as long as Xiaoyang was given enough time, these problems would naturally not be a problem. After all the internal and external troubles were solved, Xiaoyang would have enough time to do these things. Xiaoyang nodded. He was also clear about this. The other side is ready, Princess Mingzhu said slowly after a long time. Xiaoyang nodded. Then he stretched out his hand and took out the mountain river map. Suddenly there was a bright light and 2 people walked out slowly. These 2 people were Sun Dishing from the drifting cloud world and King Zhao from the god world. Seeing King Zhao appear, Xiaoyang was also a little surprised. He thought it would be King Da, but he was suspicious of Prime Minister Jiang Zhangqing. King Zhao had not expected this at all. Although there were some conflicts between them when they first met, and both sides were not comfortable with each other. Now it had become mutual admiration. This time, the Inflame world could be so fearful of them because of King Zhao's contribution in these few campaigns, moving lips and tongues, encouraging people's hearts. Chapter 2858. Master Xiao is truly a young hero. Us old guys are so envious. King Zhao walked out and cupped his hands with a smile. Xiao Yang felt a chill run down his spine. King Zhao had stirred up quite a storm in the Inflame world before, but now, no matter how one looked at it, he seemed like a smiling tiger. It even made one's scalp tingle. However, King Zhao's words were completely sincere. There was no scheming in them at all. If it weren't for Xiao Yang insisting on war during the Four Realms Conference, they would probably be begging for peace with the Inflame world right now. They might even end up enslaved. Of course, that was just talk. It was very difficult to actually do it. Xiao Yang had done it. He had even succeeded in destroying the Mo family and the Fire Gathering Alliance. It was clear how powerful he was. Although it wasn't Xiao Yang's work alone, if it weren't for his courage and meticulous planning, there wouldn't be such a great situation today. City Lord. Sun Dishing cupped his hands with a smile. Xiao Yang nodded and said, "Don't be like that, King Zhao. We're just doing our best." King Zhao laughed heartily when he heard that. He now felt that Xiao Yang was a wonderful person. At the same time, King Zhao knew very well that his son, Xinwu, almost went astray in the Divine Tomb. It was all thanks to Xiao Yang's help that he was able to walk out safely. Furthermore, Xinwu's mentality had changed under Xiao Yang's guidance and care. That was why he had reached his current level of cultivation and strength. In addition, Xiao Yang had taken the initiative to resolve the crises of the Myriad Beasts world and the Inflame world. Such a great achievement was unique in the Four Realms Alliance. Princess Mingzhu and Bai Jian had indeed contributed a lot, but the backbone was Xiao Yang. If it weren't for him, no matter how powerful this team was, they wouldn't have been able to display their full potential. In particular, when the Myriad Beasts world had just emerged, they weren't very powerful. If it weren't for Xiao Yang's intervention, they probably would have fallen. Even surviving would have been a problem. Sect leader Xiao, there's no need to be modest. You're now a great hero who is revered by tens of thousands of people. King Zhao chuckled. This was not an exaggeration. Xiao Yang was a legendary figure in the Four Realms Alliance and was worshipped by countless young people. Many people saw him as their idol and wanted to become someone like him. Xiao Yang could only laugh bitterly. He didn't really care about this statement. Although this was the truth, sometimes when it was said out loud, it was inevitable that it would feel a little strange. It made people feel that there was something wrong. After exchanging greetings for a while, Princess Mingzhu summoned the flying ship and began to head towards the Luoyan mountain. Sun Dishing and King Zhao came here mainly to make the Luoyan mountain compensate the Four Realms Alliance on behalf of the Inflame realm. As for why they were late by a few days, they were making a list. It took them quite a bit of effort to figure it out. City Lord, please take a look at this list. If there's anything you need to add, we can add it before we arrive at the Luoyan mountain. Sun Dishing handed over a list and said, however, the Inflame realm might not necessarily compensate according to this list. So it was up to Sun Dishing and King Zhao to haggle. Although they could directly use force to threaten them, that was not good. It was also good to pretend to leave some face for the other side. Leave some face for everything so that they could meet again in the future. If their relationship was strained from the start, and the falling flame mountain didn't fall for it, the entire Inflame realm would place all the conflicts on them. In fact, there might even be more variables in the future. Although the Inflame realm had completely lost the ability to compete with the Four Realms Alliance, it would be easy to be disturbed if an all-out war broke out. Therefore, if it could be easily solved, it would not take too much effort. You can decide. I'll leave this matter to you. I'll just go through the motions and intimidate the other side. Xiao Yang said with a smile. He did not take the list. Sun Dishing also knew that the city lord was used to being a hands-off boss. There were many things that he did not like to ask about. He directly accepted the list and did not force it. King Zhao only smiled knowingly. One should not doubt the person he used. King Zhao also understood that the current Sun Dishing could be considered the old leader of Northern Light City. However, the truly peaceful people were still those who ascended from the Middle Realm and were still in Northern Light City. For example, Arctic Grey Feather and Qian Guangqi. Sun Dishing was obviously not in this list. The two of them might not have the highest status, but they definitely had the most authority. The two of them also returned the favor. That was why the Flowing Cloud Realm was flourishing day by day. The mountain lord of the Luoyan Mountain, Ping Chunsheng, is a person who is very good at hiding his strength. The name Three Great Powers sounds big, but Ping Chunsheng seems to be dispensable. It can be seen that this person is very good at hiding his strength. Therefore, we have to be careful. Don't fall into his trap. Xiaoyang thought for a while and said, in the following negotiations, there would even be some discussion. However, Xiaoyang would not touch these troublesome matters. However, these matters might not be troublesome for Sun Dishing. Instead, they would make him excited and even incomparably happy. After all, this was the domain that he specialized in. I'll remember. Sun Dishing said in a low voice. Xiaoyang nodded and said, this person is also very calculative. You can even say that he's very meticulous. His skills are also not weak. Soon after, Xiaoyang also leisurely told Sun Dishing and King Zhao everything that he knew and understood about Ping Chunsheng. They were the people in charge of this matter. Naturally, they also needed to understand Ping Chunsheng. No matter what, it was the same principle. Only by knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy would one be able to win 100 battles. If he didn't know anything about his opponent, he was afraid that there would be problems during the negotiation. He might even be caught off guard. King Zhao was also very engrossed in listening. He quickly calculated in his heart. He had to do these things. He could not allow any mistakes to occur. Otherwise, if he made a wrong move or said the wrong thing, he might lose a lot of resources. Of course, they only cared about the attitude. They did not care much about the resources. However, King Zhao was different. He felt that it was better to have something than nothing. If they asked for too much, the other party would know the pain. In the future, when they acted, they would have to carefully consider whether they had enough resources to go against them. 2 days later, Xiaoyang and the other three rode the flying ship and arrived in front of the Luoyan Mountain. The Luoyan Mountain was incomparably huge. Chapter 28:59. When they arrived at the Falling Flame Mountain, a young martial emperor came forward to lead the way and brought the four of them in. The Falling Flame Mountain sect relied on the Blessed Enclave. However, they chose to build their sect at the foot of the mountain instead of on the mountain. This had always been a question in the Yin Flame world. However, no one had ever gotten an answer to this question, which made people very puzzled. The Falling Flame Mountain sect did not seem to care about this matter. Moreover, they were deliberately keeping a low profile. Therefore, there were many speculations about this question. However, no one could be sure about what was going on. Gradually, no one cared about this question anymore. After all, it was something that made people curious. After a long time without any response, they gradually forgot about this matter. Along the way, they discovered that although many people in the Falling Flame Mountain sect were dissatisfied with them and were even afraid of them, they did not show any signs of losing their composure. From this, it could be concluded that Ping Chunsheng had already explained this matter clearly. Moreover, he could also control them, which was why they were behaving like this. It could also be seen that Ping Chunsheng's words carried enormous weight in the Falling Flame Mountain sect. His words were absolutely reliable. The young martial emperor did not say anything. Xiaoyang did not ask and just followed them. At the same time, he could also sense that there were not many people living in the sect. Most of the disciples were probably on the mountain. Although there were not many buildings on the mountain, there were probably many caves on the mountain. Many disciples were cultivating in seclusion on the mountain. After a short while, the four of them were led to the main hall by the young martial emperor. The young martial emperor also took his leave. The only people waiting in the main hall were the falling flame mountain sect master, Ping Chinching, and his blockhead disciple. Ping Chinching knew that the blockhead would definitely cause trouble if he stayed here. However, he was willing to bring him along. After all, it was not a bad thing to let him see the world. Perhaps after seeing so much that day he had learned to be smarter? Although it was a little extravagant, Ping Chincheng was willing to give it a try. Sure enough, after the blockhead answered Xiao Yang's question, his face was filled with displeasure. He even looked as if he wanted to draw his sword and attack them. Fellow Taoist Xiao is indeed a young hero. His words carry enormous weight. Since he said that he would destroy the Converge Fire Union, he did just that, Ping Chinching said with a smile. Sun Dishing and Zhao Wang began to size up this person. They knew that Ping Chinching was not an easy opponent to fool. Moreover, in the following negotiations, there would probably be some disturbances. Princess Mingzhu, on the other hand, did not say a word. She was not interested in these small talk and social interactions. This time, he was only here to protect Xiaoyang. In the future, he would definitely not have any contact with the peaceful, mortal world. Not at all, not at all. Mountain Lord Ping's intelligence is rare. He didn't get involved in this mess. Xiaoyang laughed. Ping Chinching's expression froze for a moment. He didn't take this ridicule to heart. If he were to fly into a rage out of humiliation because of these few words, then he would no longer be the mountain lord of the falling flame mountain. What's wrong with saying a few words sometimes? Moreover, he would not lose a piece of flesh because of this, so there was no need for him to pester her. Ping Chincheng arranged for everyone to take their seats and made some small talk. He praised Xiaoyang and the other two's strength and the Four Realm Alliance's outstanding people. Of course, Xiaoyang also shamelessly praised the Luoyan mountain a few times, and everyone stopped there. Now, Ping Chensheng was even more determined. He felt that he had made a wise choice by not starting a war with the falling flame mountain. Although the lady did not say a word, they could feel her noble aura. Of course, this was secondary. She had cultivated to the 6th level Martial King realm at such a young age. With such talent, how could they not be afraid? Previously, Ping Chinching had received news that an almighty had come to the falling flame mountain and had killed the peak master of the 9 peaks. However, no one had told him that the lady had reached the 6th level Martial King realm. If they went, they might not be able to return. If they took a step back, the falling flame mountain would inevitably be cursed. However, in the long run, it would be a great achievement. The Yin Flame world, where heroes rose together, would eventually be unified by the falling flame mountain. Moreover, the person favored by Tianyin was now in the falling flame mountain. Mountain Lord Ping, let's not talk about these trivial matters. Let's talk about business. Xiaoyang said with a smile. Hearing this, Ping Chinching's expression turned serious. He nodded in agreement. After all, Xiaoyang's visit this time around was definitely for something big. Moreover, they had talked about it before. However, it was just a prototype. They could not make do with it. Ping Chensheng gritted his teeth. He felt that it was not bad to pay to avoid disaster. At least, it was better than being destroyed. I want the Falling Flame Mountain to apologize to the Four Realm Alliance on behalf of the Yin Flame world and compensate us. Is that okay with you? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Ping Chensheng felt that this was an undeserved disaster. Now that the two forces that had offended the Four Realm Alliance had been destroyed and they had taken their revenge, they still wanted compensation. This was too much. However, Ping Chensheng suppressed these thoughts in his heart and did not express them. Everyone had complaints. It was just a matter of how they controlled them and whether they would cause trouble. When the blockhead heard this, his heart burned with anger. He even wanted to start a fight. However, his master had told him that as long as he watched, he could not move. He could not even move his mouth. Therefore, no matter how unhappy the blockhead was, he could only endure it. He did not dare to show it. The blockhead had always been fearless. However, he still obeyed his master's words. Although he was dissatisfied, his master's orders did not conflict with his master's orders. Of course, in the end, it is our Flame world's fault. Ping Chinching said with a smile. Of course, this matter wasn't as simple as just reparations. From this action, there was no doubt that the falling flame mountain would represent the Flame world. This was a foreshadowing for the unification of the Four-Realm Alliance. Among them, there were many dirty things that intertwined with benefits, and they could not be discussed openly. These things had been said clearly last time. There was no need to repeat them. Of course, Ping Chenxing believed in Xiao Yang's character. Otherwise, Nan Hong would not have been able to reach the falling flame mountain safely. She would have died on their flying ship. The so-called person with great fortune died prematurely. Even if they did not kill her, it would be easy to imprison Nan Hong. Feel free to state your requests. If there is anything inappropriate, we can slowly discuss it later. Ping Chenxing said with a smile. Xiao Yang gave Sun Dishing a look. Sun Dishing took out a list and handed it to Ping Chenxing. He said, Mountain Lord Ping, this is our list of requests. Please take a look. Chapter 2860. Ping Chenxing's eyelids twitched when he saw the long list. This Xiao Yang was really straightforward. Why did he start talking about this matter directly? Previously, they were just exchanging pleasantries. How could this be considered as foreshadowing? This was the first time he had met such a straightforward person. However, there were some things that should be made clear earlier. If there were too many twists and turns, it would be awkward and uncomfortable to talk about it later. It was a good thing that this matter could be settled earlier. They're really well prepared. Ping Chenxing muttered in his heart and started looking through the list. In the beginning, Ping Chenxing's expression was still normal. However, the more he looked, the more his eyelids twitched. These guys really dared to ask for things. Moreover, the items and resources they asked for were relatively rare in the Flame realm. Although these things wouldn't make them bankrupt, the entire Flame realm would have to bear the cost. Even so, it was still painful. Originally, Ping Chenxing was prepared to take out some items from the falling flame mountain and use his own assets to settle this matter. However, he didn't expect that things weren't as simple as he thought. Looking at the other party's attitude, it seemed impossible for them to change their minds. Although they couldn't change much, they could still negotiate. As long as they understood the other party's bottom line and didn't let them get angry, they could reduce their losses as much as possible. Sun Dishing and Zhao Wang were both paying attention to the changes in Ping Chenxing's expression. After a long time, Ping Chenxing also finished looking through the list. He said with some difficulty, Taoist Xiao, you're making things difficult for me. It's fine. We can talk. Xiao Yang smiled. Hearing this, Ping Chenxing's heart calmed down a little. This was for the best. He was afraid that Xiao Yang would insist that there was no room for negotiation. This was the most difficult thing to do. Taoist Xiao, thank you for your generosity. Ping Chenxing said with a smile. Xiao Yang waved his hand. He didn't think too much about it. However, Mountain Chieftain Ping, please take a look and ponder over it. There's no rush to haggle now. You can talk to Sun Dishing and Zhao Wang if you've thought it through. They'll take full responsibility for this matter, so they can make a final decision. Xiao Yang introduced the two men to Ping Chenxing as he spoke. Ping Chenxing cupped his hands in greeting. Sun Dishing and King Zhao also returned greeting. Although Ping Chenxing was smiling, his heart was filled with worry. He suddenly felt that things might not go as smoothly as he had imagined. Although Xiao Yang was easy to talk to, these two were not so easy to talk to. Moreover, he had specifically asked them to discuss this matter. This meant that the two of them were definitely powerful figures in this aspect. That was why Xiao Yang dared to entrust this matter to them without worry. Ping Chenxing felt a headache coming on. It seemed that it would be difficult for him to reach a satisfactory conclusion. Therefore, sometimes, things just made one feel so helpless. Even if one had all the tricks up their sleeves, it would still be difficult to display them. Perhaps he might even meet his match. The more Ping Chunxing thought about it, the angrier he became. However, no matter how uncomfortable he felt, he could only suppress it in his heart. Mountain Lord Ping, please arrange for us to rest first. We're tired from the long journey. You'll also have enough time to think about it, Xiaoyang said with a smile. The blockhead glared at him angrily. He was clearly unhappy. However, Xiaoyang and the others ignored him as if he didn't exist. This made him even angrier. It's my fault. I didn't receive you well. Please don't blame me, Ping Chunxing said with an apologetic smile. Xiaoyang smiled and didn't take it to heart. Liang Qi, lead the guests to rest. Don't neglect them, Ping Chunxing said with a smile. The young martial emperor walked in and invited Xiaoyang and the others to the guest room. Liang Qi was well behaved and didn't dare to neglect them. He had heard about these people and knew how powerful they were. Once they were angered, the consequences would be unimaginable. Of course, Ping Chunxing knew that Liang Qi wouldn't cause any trouble. That was why he asked him to receive Xiaoyang and the others. He didn't dare to neglect them. Although Xiaoyang was easy to talk to, the others might not be. Moreover, being easy to talk to didn't mean that they were easy to get along with. If they were unhappy, the situation might change. After Xiaoyang left, the blockhead snorted coldly. He looked at the list and wished he could tear it to pieces. Master, they've gone too far. How can you tolerate them? The blockhead complained unhappily. The blockhead was already unhappy with the way they tried to make peace. How could he feel comfortable now that there were so many things? Ping Chunxing looked at the list in his hand and smiled without saying a word. He started to think again. After all, he had to settle the score. He had to figure out how to make sure he didn't suffer any losses. I know you're not convinced, but what can you do? If you can beat him, then go ahead and fight. Or, if you can make the Luoyan mountain better in the future, that's fine too, Ping Chunxing said indifferently. The blockhead was like a deflated balloon. He was unconvinced, but there was nothing he could do. He was full of resentment. I brought you along because I wanted you to see how these almighty people conduct themselves. You can also use them to improve your skills. You've always been led by your emotions and can't control yourself. Master's painstaking efforts have been fed to a dog, Ping Chunxing said with a bitter smile. At that moment, the blockhead was like a child who had made a mistake. He lowered his head. He knew that he had let down his master's painstaking efforts. However, he felt uncomfortable in his heart. He felt that this couldn't go on. He couldn't get over the hurdle in his heart. You have a good heart, but sometimes you can't see the situation clearly. I hope that you can see these things clearly and stay true to your heart. Only then can you achieve what you want. Although you've come this far under my protection, how far can you go? Ping Chunxing sighed. In Ping Chunxing's opinion, the blockhead's thoughts were the purest. He had the best chance to go further. Since he had high hopes for this disciple, he naturally hoped that he could go further. I'll remember it, the blockhead said with some grievance. Ping Chunxing put his hand on his forehead as he looked at this honest disciple. He felt that it was already pretty good for him to come this far. A fifth-level martial king was a figure who could dominate a region in the Inflame world. However, if he wanted to stand out, he had to go further. Only then could he decide the survival of a region. However, there weren't many fifth-level martial kings left in the Inflame world. The fifth-level martial kings of the Mo family and the Gathering Fire Alliance had all died in battle. Ping Chunxing was the only sixth-level martial king left. Chapter 2861. Liang Qi led the way, bringing Xiaoyang and the others to a rather secluded courtyard. Even though the courtyard was secluded, there were many spirit flowers and spirit grasses, and it was full of life. At the same time, there were some strange flowers and trees that had the effect of condensing spirit energy. It seemed like a casual arrangement, but it was a great effort. Perhaps these arrangements would not be a big deal in other worlds, and any sect or family with a bit of foundation would be able to do this. However, this was the Flame world, and they were not good at this. Xiao Yang deeply breathed in and calmed down. He looked around and found that there were indeed many small flaws. After settling everyone down, Liang Qi excused herself and did not stay for long. If there was anything they needed, they could just call out to him. In order to avoid any accidents, he did not leave any servants for them to order around. After all, the current situation was quite special. If 1 or 2 people suddenly became hot-blooded and directly started fighting, the outcome would be unpredictable. Xiao Yang and the others did not take this to heart. Without outsiders present, it would be easier for them to talk. King Zhao and Princess Mingzhu returned to their rooms to rest, while Sun Dishing followed Xiaoyang and reported the current situation of the flowing cloud world. Even though Xiaoyang had always been a hands-off boss, there were many things that he still needed to know. After all, as the ruler of a world, he needed to know the general trend. Moreover, after discovering problems, he could directly change the policies. Xiaoyang listened carefully. Even though the 2 heroes of the Sun family had always made him feel at ease, their vision was still limited, and it was inevitable that they would not be able to see further into the future. As such, what Xiaoyang needed to do was look into the areas that they had missed out and solve those problems. That way, everyone would not have to worry too much. Hearing these reports, Xiaoyang nodded in satisfaction. As expected, they did not disappoint. The implementation of the various policies could not be any better for the current flowing cloud world. According to their estimates, the flowing cloud world would be able to recover in less than 100 years. Of course, this was on the premise that there were no unforeseen circumstances. If they could obtain enough resources in the Flame realm this time, they might even be able to advance the time. Of course, for example, if Xiaoyang broke through again, this would be enough to make the flowing cloud realm even more prosperous. These were all outside of the plan. Therefore, according to Sun Dishing's point of view, time would only continue to advance. As more and more unforeseen events occurred, the speed of advancement would also increase. Xiaoyang kept this matter in his heart and didn't think too much about it. Since this matter had already been decided, there was naturally no need for him to say anything more. In fact, there was no need for him to even check and fix the loopholes. The growth of the Sun Clan's 2 heroes really made people look at them in a new light. In the past, they always felt that their vision was blinded because of their cultivation level. Now, it seemed that he had worried too much. Of course, in the future, Xiaoyang would also control some important matters. No matter how smart a person was, they would still make mistakes. However, if they were to monitor each other, the mistakes would be minimized. This time, a few good seedlings had appeared in the flowing cloud realm. They all had the potential to break through to the martial emperor realm, which made people very happy. Currently, the flowing cloud realm had martial emperors, but there were still too few. In fact, compared to the Mo clan's forces or the Gathering Fire Alliance, the 4-realm alliance was inferior. It could even be said that the Falling Flame Mountain was inferior. The main reason why they were able to win this time was because they had the upper hand. Moreover, Xiaoyang, Princess Mingzhu, and Bai Jian were all geniuses. In addition, they had the even more unfathomable God Emperor as their backing, which was why they were in such a situation. If they were ordinary martial emperors, they would be seeking their own deaths if they wanted to fight against the Flame realm. Even though Xiaoyang and the others were extraordinary, they had almost lost their lives in this battle. If it weren't for their good luck, they would have been buried in the raging river. City Lord, do you have any intention of taking in 1 or 2 disciples? Sun Dishing frowned and asked worriedly. From his point of view, the City Lord had never taken in a disciple, which made people feel extremely helpless. In other words, Xiaoyang's legacy would probably not be inherited by anyone in the future. A long time ago, even when they were still in the 3,000 small worlds, the two heroes of the Sun Clan had discussed this matter. Xiaoyang would definitely not stay in the flowing cloud realm. In the future, he would definitely ascend. At that time, although the Northern Light City would still be strong, there would be no absolute powerhouse to oversee it. Although the development of the city would continue to rise, it wouldn't be too high. In fact, when Xiaoyang's remaining power was used up, the city would start to decline. At that time, it would be impossible for the Northern Light City to be the sole power. Later on, Xiaoyang did not abandon the flowing cloud realm and became their common lord. At that time, the two heroes of the Sun Clan saw hope again. They did everything they could to help. At the same time, they set their sights on the entire flowing cloud realm and not just the development of the Northern Light City. Now, the two heroes of the Sun Clan once again realized that Xiaoyang would still leave one day. It was reasonable for him to walk towards a wider stage or even to the 3,000 large worlds. Xiaoyang was already barely able to bring them to the 3,000 small worlds, so he probably wouldn't be able to bring them to the large worlds. Thus, there would be a day when Lord Xiao would leave. Without the strongest protector, the flowing cloud realm would probably have a hard time in the 3,000 small worlds. Even though they had an alliance with the God realm, this kind of relationship, after Xiaoyang left, how long would it last? Currently, the flowing cloud realms Muyang and Chu Tain were not low in cultivation. If they were to raise their arms and call for help, the flowing cloud realm would probably split apart. At that time, the favorable situation would most likely collapse directly. If Xiaoyang had a direct disciple to inherit the position of common lord, then everyone would consider the relationship and wouldn't make things too ugly. Xiaoyang didn't have any children, so he obviously didn't have such thoughts. Therefore, the two heroes of the Sun Clan could only start from a disciple. So much so that the two of them personally went to look for a candidate and chose a candidate. They were just waiting for Xiaoyang to look and nod his head. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently and said, "In the Northern Light City, who hasn't received my teachings? They are all my disciples." Su Huairugu was like this. They didn't have any master and disciple status, but he had taught many disciples of the Northern Light City. Chapter 28:62. When Sun Dishing heard this, he immediately felt a little helpless. Such words were completely prevaricating. But looking at Xiaoyang's current expression, it seemed that he did not care much about it. Indeed, as long as Xiaoyang was here, they would never need to worry about this problem. But Sun Dishing was different. The reason why he could have today was completely because of Xiaoyang's influence. If there was no Xiaoyang, the two of them would probably become nothing. Not to mention other things, just for himself, he had to think more. The things that he could fight for, he could not be careless in the slightest. If it was in the past, Sun Dishing would not have worried about such things. So what if he lost his influence in the future? At most, he would return to the countryside and live a peaceful life. But now, the family business of the flowing cloud boundary was getting bigger and bigger. If it was split, then the great situation that they worked so hard to create would be directly destroyed. Many of them were their painstaking efforts. How could they bear to see the great building that they built collapse in an instant? Sun Dishing took a deep breath. He gradually calmed himself down. It seemed that it was indeed a little inappropriate to say these things now, but he had to make plans early. City Lord, I will be frank with you. Have you ever thought that if you ascend in the future, then the flowing cloud boundary will be a situation where heroes will exist side by side? Even if our Northern Light City may still be the strongest family, but we will not be able to gather together again. Even the two of us brothers will be seen as thorns in people's eyes. Sun Dishing took a deep breath and said, Sun Dishing had some understanding of Xiaoyang's temperament. Sometimes there was no harm in saying things clearly. If he was always hesitant, that would be a bad thing. There were many things that, once said, would make people subconsciously think more about it. Since City Lord Xiao did not have the mind to think about these problems, then he would take the initiative to say it. Hearing this, Xiaoyang was first stunned, then he smiled and nodded. His gaze towards Sun Dishing had a little more praise. The current Sun Dishing seemed to have completely taken the prosperity of the flowing cloud boundary as his responsibility. This was a good thing. Only then would they be able to do their best. If everyone had ulterior motives and schemed for their own benefit, then it would be impossible for the flowing cloud world to develop. It might even become a joke. Because they had invested too much, it was normal for the two heroes of the Sun family to be a little reluctant. What you're worried about isn't unreasonable, but I'll definitely make the necessary arrangements before I leave, Xiaoyang said in a low voice. In fact, Xiaoyang also knew that it was because of him that everyone obeyed the arrangements of the two heroes of the Sun clan. It was because someone had given them the authority to do so. However, once Xiaoyang left, he was afraid that some two-faced people would jump out. Once there were more voices, their situation would slowly become awkward, or even precarious. It was still early. Even if Xiaoyang wanted to leave the 3,000 worlds, there was still a long way to go. Since the city lord already has a plan, then I won't say anything more, Sun Dishing said with a bitter smile. Now, Sun Dishing also came back to his senses. The two of them had invested a lot of effort into the flowing cloud boundary. Compared to them, Xiaoyang was only slightly more. Since Xiaoyang already had a plan, then it was meaningless for them to say anything more. Actually, it doesn't matter if the next leader is Mu Yang or Chu Taiyin. After all, it doesn't matter who takes the position in the flowing cloud boundary. As long as we can continue to lead the flowing cloud boundary and gradually become stronger, it's fine, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Sun Dishing was stunned for a moment, then he smiled. That was the logic and it made sense. Moreover, there are talents in every generation. We've done what we can. For a long time, we'll still be the main force, but after a few hundred years, we'll be considered the older generation. It's time for the younger generation to show their talents. So what if we give up our positions? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Sun Dishing nodded. If it was always them who supported the flowing cloud boundary, it would seem strong, but in reality, there would be endless troubles. People of their generation would eventually go there. Once they were gone, their successors would be weak, and the flowing cloud boundary would probably gradually decline. If they wanted to continue to prosper, then they could only pass it down generation by generation. It's our negligence. We didn't do our best to nurture the younger generation. Sun Dishing smiled bitterly. Among the older generation, Mu Yang, Chu Taiyin, and the Xiao family's ancestors were the oldest. In the future, they might temporarily take the position of leader after Xiaoyang leaves because of their prestige. But how long would they be able to sit there? In the future, if no one could convince the masses, it would still be a big problem. Before, we had to worry about different things. Now that we have extra strength, we can pay attention to this, Xiaoyang said helplessly. Originally, Mu Yang's disciple, Zhou Xiao, was favored and famous. He could become the next leader. But unfortunately, he had a problem with his mentality and died halfway. Among the younger generation, only Zhou Xiao's reputation could suppress everyone. He even had high hopes that he could surpass Xiaoyang. But now, all of that was in the past. There's no need to pay too much attention to this right now. You should focus on the matters at hand. Don't think too much, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Soon after, the two of them chatted for a while more before Sun Dishing went back. Xiaoyang sat where he was. At the same time, he began to think about this matter again. After all, the future of the flowing cloud boundary had to be planned. Actually, without looking at Mu Yang, in the older generation, there were still many talents who could hold their own. For example, Qian Guangqi and Arctic Grey Feather were not weak. They just needed time to accumulate. Looking at the Anya clan, U19 had changed a lot in the past few years. However, at the end of the day, other than Xiaoyang and the three people from the older generation, there were very few people in the flowing cloud world who could convince the masses. Thinking about this, Xiaoyang felt a headache coming. The development of a world was completely carried by a few people. That was a burden. Although they could achieve great fame, they would hinder the progress of a world's general trend. Furthermore, this matter had to be treated seriously and could not be careless. Just as Xiaoyang was thinking about this, someone knocked on the door. "Leader Xiao, if you have nothing to do, why don't you come out and admire the moonlight and drink some tea?" The voice was low and gentle. There was a pleading tone in his voice. Chapter 2863. Xiaoyang could tell that it was Ping Qingqing's voice. How could he be in the mood to drink tea at a time like this? Could it be that he did not feel anything about the list? Or could it be that he had already seen through it and was prepared to bargain with Yangming? However, regardless of the situation, Xiaoyang wanted to see what Ping Qingqing wanted to say. In fact, Xiaoyang knew that Ping Qingqing was a rather important person and had to be treated well. Whether or not this matter could be resolved satisfactorily would depend on Ping Qingqing's methods. "Sure," Xiaoyang replied and walked out. After the two of them met, they smiled at each other and exchanged pleasantries as they walked out. Right now, Ping Qingqing looked very calm, as if he didn't care about these things at all. It was as if those things could not worry him at all. In fact, when it came to compensation, Ping Qingqing did not mention a single word. It was as if nothing had happened and he only talked about some irrelevant things. Ping Qingqing was very smart to have been able to reach where he was now. He knew that since Xiaoyang had given full authority to Sun Dishing and King Zhao, he would not say anything. Therefore, even if he said these things, it would not be very meaningful in the end. Therefore, it was better to set one's sights further. There was no need to talk about those unpleasant things. After a short while, the two of them walked to the pavilion where they had met before and sat down one after another. It was as if tea had always been brewed here and it had not changed for hundreds of years. It seemed like the mountain master would come to the pavilion to drink tea and sit for a while whenever he had nothing to do. Sometimes there was a miraculous effect in this place. It could gradually calm down one's restless mind. Therefore, one began to consider things more thoroughly. The scenery of your Flame world is like this to me. It's covered in dark clouds. How can one admire the moon? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Ping Qingqing smiled but did not say anything. That was indeed the case. If one wanted to admire the moon in the Flame world, one still needed luck. It was impossible to see the moon if one was slightly lacking. The Flame world was covered in dark clouds all year round. It was difficult to see the sun or the moon. On the other hand, Ping Qingqing started to brew the tea. Everything seemed to be done in an orderly manner. It was as if he wasn't the lord of a mountain, nor was he the lord who would rule the world in the future. He was just an ordinary old man who was enjoying his free time and counting the days. Originally, I was wondering why fellow Taoist Xiao would be so kind. Now, it seems like you've calculated far ahead. I only realized that something was amiss this afternoon. Ping Qingqing suddenly said. Xiaoyang stared at Ping Qingqing and smiled. Since there were some things that were already known, there was no harm in knowing them. It was just a small trick to begin with, so there was no harm in talking about it. After all, even if there was a hole in front of him, Ping Qingqing would jump in without hesitation. What an open and above-board scheme. You're certain that I'll stop these conflicts. Amazing, amazing. Now, it seems like it's not without reason that fellow Taoist Xiao was able to come this far, Ping Qingqing said with a smile. After the destruction of the Fire Union, Ping Qingqing was even more shocked. Therefore, he activated all his connections to collect all the information about the young man in front of him and looked through them one by one. This person's growth could be said to be unimaginable. When he had just entered the 10,000 beast realm, his strength was probably not enough. Therefore, he could only start to stir up trouble in the southeast. However, no matter which incident it was very exciting. It's good that you understand, Mountain Lord Ping. How can you not pay a price if you want to achieve great things? In this world, there's nothing that can be accomplished overnight. Sitting back and reaping the fruits of others' labor, I'm afraid it's not that easy, Xiaoyang said with a smile. Ping Qingqing nodded. They already had a tacit understanding about the transfer of conflicts. In fact, no matter how one looked at it, Ping Chensheng would be able to earn something. In the next few decades, there would probably be many voices in the Yin Flame world that refused to accept their falling flame mountain. There might even be many riots. However, these riots could be suppressed. They could even boldly and decisively occupy the entire Yin Flame world. When that time came, the benefits that they could obtain would not be so simple. In fact, it would even cause people to be moved, under the temptation of huge benefits, who could remain unmoved like a mountain. In fact, Ping Chensheng even felt that, so what if he had to bear some infamy? Of course, he could also use this method to transfer the conflict. He could just criticize the Mo family and the Fire Symbol Alliance and say that they were the ones who caused the trouble, causing the innocent people in the Yin Flame world to suffer. However, Ping Chensheng could not take the initiative to say this. He only needed to arrange some people to do it, and that would be enough. Although that's the case, I still feel a little uncomfortable, Ping Chensheng said with a sigh. It was not that Ping Chensheng did not have any ambition. However, he gradually realized that he could not change the overall situation. He could only bow his head and be willing to be an ox. So what if he paved the way? If the falling flame mountain could really unify the Yin Flame world, the benefits that they could obtain would be very impressive. Think about it. We didn't do anything to you, and the three major forces are the only ones left. That's great, Xiaoyang said with a smile. As soon as he said this, the corner of Ping Chensheng's mouth twitched subconsciously. There was more or less a hint of warning in his words. Ping Chensheng smiled bitterly when he looked at the young man and thought about the person that he had learned about. Xiaoyang was indeed easy to talk to. He was also an upright person who would not go back on his words. However, this did not mean that he would not be angry or that other things would not happen. There were many things that one had to consider here. Sometimes one could not say too much and would make mistakes. Therefore, there were some things that could not be said easily and could only be kept in one's heart. As he thought about this, Ping Chensheng felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. However, he could not help but think about it. After all, he had come this far, so he had to accept this outcome. Currently, the Yin Flame world was indeed facing an unprecedented storm, but there were also countless opportunities. Moreover, it was a great opportunity to recruit them. How could he miss it? Ping Chensheng's mood became a lot gloomier when he looked at the dark clouds in the sky. It seemed that he had never encountered a situation where everything went smoothly. Did Nanhong come to the falling flame mountain? Xiaoyang suddenly asked. Since the last time they parted, he had not seen Nanhong again. It was indeed admirable for such a hot-headed person to be like that. It was not easy for a person with a pure heart to emerge in such a chaotic environment. Chapter 2864. He's here, Ping Chensheng said with a smile. Xiaoyang frowned as soon as he heard that. The only person who could help Nanhong was the Luoyan mountain. It was a wise decision to come here. However, given Nanhong's character, he would not have taken the initiative to come to the Luoyan mountain. Ping Chensheng saw that Xiaoyang was worried, so he told him everything that he knew. Since Xiaoyang was willing to let Nanhong go, and even told him that there was such a person in Ping Chensheng, it was obvious that he would not kill him. However, judging from Xiaoyang's expression, something was not right. If Ping Chensheng told him, he might be able to clarify some things. If there were any details that were overlooked, Ping Chensheng could find out and fill in the gaps. Xiaoyang listened carefully and paid attention to see if there were any loopholes. After all, the person he valued was Nanhong from back then. If Nanhong's temperament changed drastically, there might be variables. The best way to deal with this was to find out as soon as possible and get rid of the hidden dangers. Xiaoyang's expression turned grave after Ping Chensheng told him everything. Initially, he thought that Ping Chensheng would take the initiative to look for Nanhong. However, he did not expect Ping Chensheng to take the initiative to look for him. The reason for this was somewhat thought-provoking. I know Nanhong's character very well. If he interferes in this mess, I'm afraid his state of mind will be damaged. Moreover, if he wants to ascend the throne in the future, it won't be good if there's a stain on his record, Ping Chunxing said. When he saw Xiao Yang's grave expression, his mood became much gloomier. Could there be some details that I don't know about? Where exactly are these variables? There were some things that had to be investigated. After all, if there were any problems in the small details, many plans would be ruined. Nan Hong had already become Ping Chunxing's disciple and would help the Luoyan mountain in the future. If Ping Chunxing had ulterior motives and was only using him, things would be bad. Perhaps in the future, for some benefits or to convince the masses, Nan Hong might make an example out of the Luoyan mountain, who did not help and took advantage of the situation. Why? Is there a problem? Ping Chunxing asked in confusion. Xiao Yang nodded. He smiled bitterly and said, Nan Hong probably has an expert helping him plan. You didn't ask Nan Hong to come to the Luoyan mountain? When Ping Chunxing heard this, he instantly figured out the crux of the matter and asked in shock. Xiao Yang nodded. He only felt that the Luoyan mountain could help Nan Hong. However, he had never said it out loud. If some words were said too clearly, the meaning would change. Back then, he had taken the initiative to tell Ping Chunxing that he wanted him to find Nan Hong and pave the way for him. Instantly, Ping Chunxing's expression turned grave. If that was the case, this matter would need to be reconsidered. If Nan Hong was instructed by someone, then who was the person behind him? For a moment, there were many problems that were originally not a problem. Therefore, Ping Chunxing had no choice but to be cautious. After all, what he saw in the past was great benefits. However, at this moment, he felt that he was being used as a tool. How could he feel at ease? It was fine for the Luoyan mountain to be a stepping stone. However, Ping Chunxing could not accept being stepped into the mud. Of course, there was another possibility. Xiao Yang had said this on purpose, so that there would be animosity between them, so that Nan Hong's path would not be so smooth. The latter was still fine. Although there would be some detours, it would not be a problem. The Luoyan mountain would still be safe, and they could move forward step by step. However, if it was the former, the situation would be terrible. Ping Chunxing felt a headache when he thought about this. It seemed that the situation in the Inflame world had changed in this 1 year. They were like duckweeds. No matter what they did, they could not control themselves. If they were unlucky and encountered a strong wind, they would be smashed into pieces. No matter how they thought about it, they could not be optimistic. Many things made them feel uncomfortable when they thought about it. Xiao Yang was also thinking about this problem. At the same time, looking at the Inflame world, the Mo family, and the Gathering Fire Alliance's experts had all died. As for the others, they would not be able to cause any trouble. Therefore, who was the person behind Nan Hong? Moreover, he was able to listen to his words. This was enough to make people ponder deeply. They did not dare to be careless. However, there was no need to be overly worried. As long as Nan Hong could not surpass them, he would never become a threat. After all, Nan Hong was favored by this world. He was very strong in the Inflame world. Once he left, he would not be as strong. After this war, the Inflame realm would not be able to recover for the next few hundred years, let alone attack the Four Realms Alliance. By the time they fully recovered, the Four Realms Alliance would have grown. There was no need to be afraid of them. Xiao Yang took a deep breath. At the same time, he became much more confident. He only needed to know what was going on. As for what was going on, Ping Chunxing was probably more anxious than him. Maybe he suddenly became enlightened, Xiao Yang said with a smile. After all, it was also possible that he was favored by the world and suddenly gained spiritual wisdom. Ping Chunxing stroked his teacup and remained silent. No matter what it was, it made sense. However, he wanted to know more about it. After all, everyone knew how to make groundless accusations. However, if there was a mistake in the actual operation, it would probably lead to a disaster. Let's not talk about him for now. We'll ask him when he comes out of seclusion, Ping Chunxing said with a bitter smile. Nan Hong's character was like that. If there was really an unspeakable secret, he would not be able to hide it. Just like Blockhead, if he was unhappy in his heart, he would never hide it. He would show all his emotions. Therefore, they were very real. Ping Chunsheng liked them very much. Xiaoyang nodded. He felt that this was enough. He did not need to worry too much about other things. Sometimes he would think too much. However, it was hard to say what would happen in the end. Therefore, he would take it one step at a time. Since Ping Chunsheng was there was no need for him to spend too much time on this. Soon after, Ping Chunsheng's expression became much more serious. He said, "There's still a detail that we haven't paid attention to. We need to treat it with caution." As soon as he said this, Xiaoyang's eyebrows furrowed. Since Ping Chunsheng was so serious, it meant that this was not a trivial matter. In fact, it might even affect the two of them. That was why he was so serious. Ping Chunsheng would not worry unnecessarily. Chapter 2865. Xiaoyang pondered for a while and said, "Just tell me what the hidden danger is. Even if I don't solve it myself, I can help you." If they wanted the falling flame mountain to shoulder all the conflicts, they needed to go smoothly. Perhaps some variables would greatly reduce the effectiveness of such a plan. Moreover, looking at Ping Chunsheng's solemn expression, it was enough to show that the seriousness of the matter had reached a stage where he could not ignore it. "This is not only a hidden danger for me. You're the one who bears the brunt of it." Ping Chunsheng poured a cup of tea for himself and said slowly. Xiaoyang was stunned by his words. If that was the case, this matter really needed to be investigated. However, he still needed to hear what the old man had to say about the specific situation. "It can't be that bad, right?" Xiaoyang said helplessly. At the same time, Xiaoyang began to think quickly in his heart. Where did he overlook, or where did he leave a hidden danger? However, when he thought about it carefully, the people from the Mo family and the Gathering Fire Alliance who could cause a storm had already lost their lives. Who else could stand up? Moreover, Ping Chunsheng felt threatened by it. Ming Yan has a son. Do you know about this? Ping Chunsheng hesitated for a while before he slowly said. As soon as he said this, Xiaoyang could not help but be shocked. Naturally, he knew about this news. However, he knew very little about Ming Yan's son. He only knew that he had left the Yin Flame world long ago, and there had been no news of him for hundreds of years. It was also because there had been no news for many years that people had subconsciously neglected this matter. "I've only heard about it. I'm not sure about the specific situation," Xiaoyang said in a deep voice. Xiaoyang did not expect such an unexpected hidden danger. Whether Ming Yan's son was still alive or not was a big problem. After all, there had been no news for hundreds of years. This was enough to explain many things. Ming Yan's son, Ming Jun, was the #1 genius in the Yin Flame world back then. Even when compared to Xing Tian of the Myriad Beast realm, he was not outdone. At that time, there was even a saying that if the Yin Flame realm and the Myriad Beast realm wanted to determine the victor, it would depend on who could walk faster, Ming Jun or Xing Tian. The person who walks faster will win. Ping Chunsheng smiled bitterly as he spoke. Xiaoyang's expression also became much more serious. In this way, things were really difficult to say. To be able to be mentioned in the same breath as Xing Tian, and even the outcome of the war between the two worlds depended on the two of them. From this, one could see how terrifying their talent was. Xiaoyang had seen Xing Tian before, and he was indeed a very powerful existence. Looks like this is a tough nut to crack. Xiaoyang frowned. If such a person had gone out to train and was still alive, his achievements would not have been low. Xiaoyang couldn't help but feel worried. Even Ping Chunsheng's expression didn't look good. He was also very clear that if Ming Jun returned and found out that the Falling Flame Mountain didn't help him, and even had the intention of unifying the Yin Flame world, he would probably understand some things very quickly. At that time, the Falling Flame Mountain might be in trouble. It would be the best outcome if Xiaoyang was able to stop such a great calamity. Otherwise, if that genius came back and questioned them, the falling flame mountain might not be able to stop him. The reason why Ming Jun is so quiet is because he was valued by an almighty from another world. He was taken in as a closed-door disciple and went there to cultivate. Ping Qinsheng said. As soon as this was said, Xiaoyang couldn't help but laugh. Originally, he thought that the potential opponent had suddenly died. However, from the looks of it now, it was impossible. Since he was taken in as a closed-door disciple, it was enough to see how important he was. To be able to make Ming Yan willingly hand over his son to cultivate in another world, it can be seen how powerful that sect is. Even Ming Yan is somewhat afraid of them. Ping Qinsheng said helplessly. What he was more afraid of was the sect behind Ming Jun. If that sect interfered, the situation would become very bad. It might even reach a point where they couldn't bear it. Some people even said that when Ming Jun returns, it will be the time to fight with the Wanshou realm. As Ping Qinsheng said this, he was filled with emotions. He knew all this because he was in a high position. That was why he had accurate information. Back then, most of the people in the Yin Flame world only knew that Ming Jun had mysteriously disappeared. Now, Xiaoyang's expression had become much uglier. It seemed that no matter how he looked at it, Ming Jun was a great threat. If he knew what had happened in the Yin Flame realm, he probably wouldn't let the matter rest. At the same time, Xiaoyang had a headache. He originally thought that the external threat had been dealt with. He didn't expect that he would end up provoking an even greater threat. One problem after another, it was as if there was no way to completely solve the problem. Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly. Since things had come to this, what else could he do? If Ming Jun really came back and wanted to cause trouble for them, it would just be a battle. No matter how he looked at it, such a seemingly illusory thing couldn't be done. I'm looking for you today because of this. If Ming Jun returns, the falling flame mountain will bear the brunt of the disaster, Ping Qinsheng said. Ping Qinsheng's meaning was very clear. He hoped that Xiaoyang could help them solve this problem. Xiaoyang lowered his head and drank his tea. He couldn't be sure about this matter, so he could only think carefully. Of course, he could leave the mountain river map in the falling flame mountain so that he could come here immediately. However, how could he be at ease if such a precious treasure like the mountain river map was left here, in the Northern Gathering Fire Alliance? Due to the previous battle, there were no cultivators above the martial emperor realm stationed here within a radius of 10,000 miles. Even many of the high-level Kingwu were in seclusion. This place was like an Azura field. They didn't dare to stay here for even a moment. If they stayed here for too long, they might be seen by those people and die. Of course, there were also some people who didn't leave. However, their cultivation levels were very low. They felt that they wouldn't be seen by the three vicious people, and they wouldn't be easily crushed to death. Those mountains, which were originally filled with people, were now completely deserted. The territory of the Gathering Fire Alliance seemed to have become a place. At this moment, a man descended from the sky. He was wearing a brocade jade robe. He seemed to be keeping a low profile, but he had a noble temperament as if he was an outstanding junior of an aristocratic family. Chapter 2866. The man in the embroidered robe hovered in the air. When he looked down at the huge pit beneath his feet, his expression was full of shock. In the next moment, a thin man descended from the sky. He looked at the deep pit below and frowned slightly. "Martial nephew, this old man remembers you saying that the scenery of the one mountain and 9 peaks was magnificent. You also said that it was a high mountain, so why is there only a deep pit left?" The old man frowned slightly and asked in confusion. The jade-robed man's brows were almost twisted into a fried dough twist. This was also what he was thinking at the moment. He looked over and found that the 100 mountains were still there, but the 1 mountain and 9 peaks were gone. This place had become a huge pit, as if it had disappeared for no reason. His memory could not be wrong. Moreover, he had grown up here since he was young, so he knew the territory of the Fire Gathering Union like the back of his hand. He even knew where every blade of grass and every tree was, roughly how old they were, and what magical effects they had. The jade-robed man shook his head. He also did not understand why. Looking at the huge pit, the jade-robed man's expression became worse and worse. At the same time, he also did not understand why it was like this. Seeing that he did not speak, the old man shook his head helplessly. He felt that he had said something wrong. This martial nephew was already in a bad mood. If he said something like this, he would probably feel even worse. Therefore, it was better to keep quiet. The sooner this matter was over, the better it would be for them to return. I'm afraid that the 1 mountain and 9 peaks have been moved away, the jade-robed man said through gritted teeth. His hands were clenched into fists, and his expression became extremely bad. He could only deduce this, and this was the only possibility. Otherwise, the 1 mountain and 9 peaks would not have disappeared into thin air. What a big deal! The old man said, and could not help but gasp. From the description of the 1 mountain and 9 peaks, the old man could feel how magnificent it was. Looking at the huge pit with a radius of 1,000 miles, he could imagine how much land it originally occupied. At the same time, the old man felt a little regretful that he could not see such a magnificent scene on this trip. The old man thought for a moment and asked, "What do we do next?" Since it had already happened, there was no way to change it, so they could only solve it. The jade-robed man took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Let's first clarify this matter. Since the other party has made such a big fuss, they are definitely not simple." The old man nodded his head at the same time. It wouldn't be too late to talk about it after they had figured out the ins and outs of the matter. If he started to cause trouble like a headless fly without even knowing what was going on, he would be looking for trouble for himself. At the same time, the old man began to calculate in his heart. The leader of the Assemble Fire Union had died in battle, and even the 1 mountain and 9 peaks had been taken away by someone else. How strong would their opponent be? Just thinking about these questions for a moment was enough to make one tremble in fear. If things didn't work out, they could only leave first. However, seeing how angry his martial nephew was, it would not be easy for him to leave after figuring things out. Thinking of this, the old man felt even more helpless. At the same time, he did not expect such a situation to occur in such a barren land. It was truly unexpected. Could it be your enemy's doing? Suddenly, the old man thought of another possibility. Instantly, the jade-robed man's brows furrowed even more. That was very likely. However, on second thought, only a few people in the sect knew about his identity and origin. How could it have been leaked? Therefore, there were still many suspicious points in this matter. Let's investigate first. There's no rush. The man in the bathrobe took a deep breath and tried to calm himself down as much as possible. The old man only smiled and said, "Martial nephew, don't worry. Don't be rash. If it was done by a big force, our sect won't sit idly by." After drinking tea and admiring the moon that night, they talked about some things. Xiaoyang was also thinking about this matter. After a few days, Xiaoyang also thought about this matter carefully and then threw it to the back of his mind. After all, it was a distant worry. He couldn't even be sure if the opponent existed. He had too little information, so he couldn't think of a corresponding solution. Even if it was Ping Qinsheng, the information he knew was very limited. In this aspect, Ming Yan hid it very well and wouldn't easily reveal any information. As a result, Xiaoyang felt even more helpless. If he knew the opponent's situation, he could still make a countermeasure. Now that he knew nothing, there was nothing he could do. However, Xiaoyang had already made up his mind. He had to go over and take a look after a period of time to confirm it. If the hidden danger really existed, he had to get rid of it as soon as possible. Over the past few days, Sun Dishing and Zhao Wang would bargain with Ping Qinsheng every day. However, most of them didn't overdo it. They only had less than 2 hours to discuss every day. The three of them were very smart and even grasped each other's mentality perfectly. It was also because of this that both sides were slightly tired. However, Sun Dishing was very excited because he felt that he had met his match. He just had to do whatever he wanted. Xiao Yang still didn't pay attention to what was happening outside. He stayed in his room to cultivate and recover from his injuries. Princess Mingzhu wasn't interested in this at all, so she didn't come out either. Ping Qin Sheng admired him even more. He handed over everything and had a clear division of labor. What kind of courage was that? After a few days, Xiao Yang's injuries had mostly recovered. He walked out of his room. At the same time, he felt that the negotiations here were probably coming to an end. Therefore, it was time to finish some things and return to the drifting cloud world. "You're not going to let me go with you?" Princess Mingzhu asked worriedly. Xiao Yang nodded and said, "I'll be more at ease with you here." Xiao Yang was prepared to head to the Furious River and take back the soaring cloud mountain. If possible, he would refine the Furious River as well. Right now, the Yin Flame realm was no longer a threat. Thus he could head there alone. On the other hand, Sun Dishing and Zhao Wang stayed in the Falling Flame Mountain. If Ping Chen Sheng turned hostile and killed the two of them, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, it was different with Princess Mingzhu here. With a sixth-stage powerhouse overseeing this place, no matter what Ping Chen Sheng was thinking, he would have to consider the price he would have to pay. Chapter 2867. Princess Mingzhu glanced at him and nodded. "Be careful. If anything happens, I'll rush over as soon as possible." Right now, the Yin Flame world could be said to be calm and peaceful. Moreover, the Falling Flame Mountain had also begun to move. As a result, quite a few conflicts had fallen onto them. The Fallen Flame Mountain's reputation took a turn for the worse because they began to expand rapidly. They even seemed like they wanted to take the entire Yin Flame world. So many forces began to panic. They were afraid of being annexed or did not want to submit, but they did not have the guts to confront the Fallen Flame Mountain head-on. As such, they could only play tricks and use public opinion to force the Fallen Flame Mountain to stop their ambition. In fact, everyone knew that since the Fallen Flame Mountain wanted to do this, they were probably already prepared. They did not care about some rumors at all. If they stopped their plan because of public opinion, would it not be child's play? In any case, the Yin Flame world was not peaceful at the moment. However, everyone was busy with internal conflicts and did not have any thoughts about outsiders who could not compete with them at all. After all, if they wanted to contend with Xiao Yang and the others, they would be courting death. Xiao Yang nodded and said, "I'll be back soon. It won't take long." Soon after, Xiao Yang turned around and headed toward the Furious River. As for what happened in the Fallen Flame Mountain, he did not care at all. With Princess Mingzhu keeping watch, no matter how unhappy Ping Qinxing was, he would probably be able to control himself. Moreover, Ping Qinxing understood the situation very well. Even if he had any thoughts, he would not dare to carry them out. Ping Qinxing valued his sect very much. If he was hot-headed, the Fallen Flame Mountain would probably be refined by Xiao Yang and turned into his magic tool. Although their sect's disciples would not all die, most almighty beings would probably die because of this, and they would be in a constant state of anxiety. No matter how much resentment and anger the Yin Flame world had, they would probably not dare to show it. At the very least, they dared not attack powerhouses. Perhaps they would curse in private, but when they really faced it, they would probably kneel and beg for mercy. Human nature had always been like that. When something did not fall on their heads, they would act as if nothing happened. However, when the matter fell on their heads, all of their faces would be exposed. If it was just the beginning, they might still be in the mood to die. But now, perhaps no one dared to think so. The destruction of the Mo family and the Fire Assembly Union could be said to have broken the backbone of the Yin Flame world. Along the way to the south, Xiao Yang did not encounter any obstacles. He even felt that something was different. Now, many forces had already ceased their activities and were even deliberately hiding. They didn't dare to show any threat at all. On the other side of the Falling Flame Mountain, Ping Qinsheng was still calmly bargaining. What the Four Realms Alliance wanted The falling flame mountain really couldn't afford it with its current wealth. Therefore, no matter what, he felt that he could fight for it. It would be a good thing to have fewer losses. If the losses were too great, even to the point of no return, then no matter how great the future gains were, if there was a gap right now, then it would be very bad. Not long after, Xiaoyang arrived at the raging river. He looked at the towering, soaring cloud mountain with a mocking smile on his face. Back then, the raging river was so arrogant and unparalleled. In the end, it was directly suppressed and couldn't move. The raging river seemed to have sensed Xiaoyang's arrival. Instantly, the river water became turbulent like an angry ancient beast. Even the soaring cloud mountain was trembling. The reason why Xiaoyang favored the raging river was because the river had given birth to spiritual intelligence. Any mountain or river that could give birth to spiritual intelligence was not simple. Looking at the raging river, Xiaoyang revealed a smile on his face. Although the raging river had existed since the in-flame world was created and had experienced countless years, its temperament was still like that of a child's. Looks like you're still not convinced. Xiaoyang smiled indifferently. At the same time, Xiaoyang glanced around and found that the Mo family's courtyard was empty. However, the buildings there were not so perfect. It was obvious that after they left, some people came to loot it. After all, the Mo family had a huge business, and there were many books and resources. Many of the opportunities were even more tempting, so many cultivators naturally wanted to come and get a share of the pie. Since there was a great opportunity, they naturally could not miss it. If they could obtain another high-grade cultivation method, they might have a chance to establish a sect in the future. If they could obtain some precious treasures, their combat power would also increase by a lot. If you have the ability, let me out. Enter the raging river and fight again. The raging river spirit said in displeasure. During this period of suppression, knew he didn't feel any remorse, nor did he feel any desire to submit. On the contrary, it became angrier and angrier, as if it could not wait to grind the bones of this outsider into ashes to vent its hatred. However, no matter how dissatisfied and unhappy the raging river was, there was nothing it could do. The soaring cloud mountain had pinned him down precisely. No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to move the mountain away or even break free. Mountains and rivers were dependent on each other, but they also reinforced and restrained each other. Looking at the surging river water, Xiaoyang shook his head helplessly. It seemed that refining the raging river was not an easy task, no matter how one looked at it. It would even consume a lot of mental energy later on. Since you're not convinced and want to fight again, let's fight. What's the harm? Xiaoyang said with a smile. Since suppression could not make it submit, there was no harm in continuing to fight until it completely admitted defeat. Sure, let's fight again. The raging river spirit said excitedly. At this moment, the raging river spirit was also looking forward to it. During the period of time it was suppressed, it had been feeling very uncomfortable. In the past, it could go wherever it wanted. The entire raging river was its territory, and it was carefree. In addition, the raging river was cut off by the soaring cloud mountain, and its fate was cut into two parts. This caused the vitality of the raging river to be damaged. If it was suppressed for a long time, the raging river might really become two parts of the river. Xiaoyang narrowed his eyes slightly. He looked at the surging river water and nodded with a smile. Then he raised his hand to cast a spell and shouted, "Rise!" Instantly, the soaring cloud mountain flew up, and the raging river, which had been cut into two parts, merged again.